In the trial, the defendant, one defendant is here. That's Eric Menendez, and his lawyers are present, as well as the lawyers for Lyle Menendez, and the prosecution is present as well. The jury is not. Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Your Honor.
And is there something that you wanted to discuss?
Your Honor, it's to Lyle Menendez, just a scheduling matter, and we would waive his appearance.
All right, and what is the
The
issue?
court had indicated the desire to hear a witness regarding the in-camera hearing, and that witness is available at 1:30 if the court would like to hear it at that time. I don't anticipate it would take any more than 10 to 15 minutes.
All right, well, is he available all afternoon or just at 1:30?
All afternoon.
Okay, well, we'll see how we're doing and see if we can, when we can fit it in.
Should I have him here at 1:30?
Unless there's some great inconvenience for his appearance here at 1:30, with the understanding it might not be quite at 1:30.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and as far as the proceedings are concerned with Eric Menendez, are we ready to go forward?
Yes, Your Honor. The court wanted a reference to the Signorelli testimony regarding the will evidence. And that testimony appears at pages 7753 and 7754.
Yeah, Ms. Morrissey had provided that to the clerk, and I have it. My recollection was that in addition to whatever testimony there was, I also asked counsel to find if there was any reference in any in limine discussions regarding that subject. Did you find any such, or did you look?
I did not look for that. I was looking for the portions of the transcript of those particular testimony.
Your Honor, I didn't look for the in limited discussions either. I don't recall the court asking us to do that. I'm sorry. My understanding was the court had, we had discussion as to the admissibility of the testimony from Edward Hyman and Deborah Hyman, who were he was a computer expert who was hired or was recruited by Carlos Menendez to go to the house and search the will.
Right.
And the testimony, I think, will be that Eric Menendez was told by Carlos to meet the computer person and let him in, and was in fact there and let the computer person in. So we had raised an objection to the admissibility of this particular computer expert because he appeared to be someone that was hired by Carlos Menendez, and Eric was merely following Carlos's directions and being there at the place and time he was supposed to be in order to facilitate the examination of the computer.
Right, and the court did have discussions prior to the testimony of Signorelli, as I recall, and I thought they dealt with that subject as well, and they dealt with the specifics of the people's offer of proof and a discussion that the presence of the Haymans would pinpoint when it was that Signorelli was there. That's my recollection. I haven't been directed to the portion of the transcript that has that in it.
I don't believe there was such a discussion.
Well,
I think there might have been a discussion while he was testifying.
well, at some point it came out, and my recollection was that it could well have been before his testimony. Do people have any recollection of that?
Yeah, I have a recollection that in the people's motion to admit evidence filed on March 17th, that Mr. Haynes proposed that it was offered as one of the items concerning a statement made by Eric Menendez, and that's my recollection, that the defense challenged the relevancy, but that there was no ruling on that. It was just a question raised by the defense as to its relevancy, and I don't believe it was involved.
Well, if it happened at that stage, my guess would have been that the prosecution decided not to refer to it in its opening statement, so it wasn't germane at that point for a ruling, since the motion only dealt with opening statements, as I recall.
And also the Aranda issues, that's the real reason we filed it, was for the Aranda problem.
All right, but I do have a recollection that we did go forward with that and discuss the subject of the people's belief that it would pinpoint when it was that Signorelli was there. Now, whether that happened during Signorelli's testimony or prior to it, it did happen. And if we want to go back and look at every page of the transcripts, we can find it. I'm sure it did. Well, possibly, but it did happen. And whatever The objections that are now being articulated, my view is that that is admissible evidence on the theory that it, number one, corroborates Signorelli's testimony about what happened on the day he was there, and also isolates the precise date when he says these conversations occurred, the admissions by Eric Menendez. And further, it's been the subject of examination during Signorelli's testimony. It's been gone into both on direct and cross, and issues of Signorelli's credibility have been raised, and therefore the entire area is appropriate for further evidence. Under a 352 evidence code analysis, the probative value of this evidence, as proposed by the prosecution to corroborate Signorelli's testimony and to pinpoint the date of these events, substantially outweighs any prejudicial effect, and the court will admit that evidence.
Now, there's a related issue, which is the Witkin testimony.
That's really all I thought we were going to be discussing today. As I said, we went through Hyman before. I've gone through the same ruling more than once now. It's probably 3 times I've said the same thing about Hyman. Now we're talking about Witkin, which is a separate issue. And there was reference in the testimony of Craig Signorelli to Witkin and or to a person, not by name, who came to the location to erase the will, and that information came to Mr. Signorelli by statements made by Eric Menendez. And the question is the prosecution attempting to introduce that evidence, Witkin, before both juries, including the Eric Menendez jury, and if so, why, and what's your theory?
Yes, Your Honor. And the theory being that Eric Menendez knew that the computer had been erased the previous day, as he indicated to Craig Signorelli, as testified to by Craig Signorelli at page 7753 and 7754. His statement during that period of time, September 1st, to his phone conversation to his relative, Carlos Menendez, is, in his statements therein, belied by the fact that he had stated to Mr. Signorelli that he knew all along that Lyle had gotten somebody to erase the computer the day before. So I think it's relevant at this juncture.
What exactly was it that you say that Eric told Carlos on the phone?
There's a conversation which appears to have taken place while Mr. Hyman was at the 7.2 with the crime scene, in which first Mr. Hyman speaks to Carlos Menendez and then later on puts Eric Menendez on the phone. Eric indicates, "It's not my fault, I had nothing to do with it, I don't know anything about it," indicating to at least Mr. Hyman that he was denying that he knew that someone had come in to erase the computer the previous day.
Well, how does Mr. Witkin's testimony shed light on that one way or another?
Well, in fact, Mr. Witkin was there the day before, and he had erased the computer.
Was Eric there that day?
He was not.
Well, what does Mr. Witkin's testimony have to do with the conversation that Eric Menendez had on the phone? It doesn't prove or disprove what he knew. It just shows what actually happened by the testimony of Mr. Witkin. The issue is what Eric Menendez knew when he was talking on the phone.
It corroborates what Mr. Signorelli testified to as he related the conversation that he had with Eric Menendez, in which Eric Menendez stated that Lyle had hired a computer expert to erase and delete the will the previous day. So it goes to Eric Menendez's state of mind at that point.
Well, the state of mind doesn't change whether the underlying fact is proved or not. You have his statement that he said, Eric Menendez said to someone else that his brother had hired someone to erase the computer. And that state of mind is there regardless of whether Witkin comes in or not, that expression of state of mind. How does the underlying fact prove or disprove what Eric Menendez said? There's no showing that he knew Witkin was there or saw it. All you can do is at most say that perhaps Lyle Menendez told him that happened. And whether that was true or not doesn't really matter.
Well, I agree with the court that since Eric Menendez wasn't there, that he would have no personal knowledge. However, he was told of that fact by his brother and related that fact to Craig Signorelli. And the actual fact of Mr. Witkin being there is corroborative of the statement.
And
In other
you
words-
proposed to go into, before both juries, how Witkin was hired by Lyle Menendez and all the transactions that occurred. Not just the fact that Witkin was present and did something at the computer terminal or at the computer, but also the negotiations he had with Lyle Menendez and the bad check and everything else.
Well, not necessarily the bad check. I think if the court wants to exclude that part from Eric Menendez's jury, that's fine with me. But I think the fact that Mr. Witkin in fact had been at the house corroborates the statement made. In other words, if all we have before Eric Menendez's jury is the statement that Lyle told him that he had an expert erase a computer, the jury would be left with nothing other than that statement. When in fact, Mr. Witkin had been to the house the day before and had in fact deleted the real information from the computer.
Well, but do you have any evidence that Eric Menendez knew that? Or do you just have evidence that Eric Menendez said that Lyle Menendez had hired someone to do that? Do you have any proof that Eric Menendez was present or had firsthand knowledge that Witkin was there?
I have no evidence that he had firsthand knowledge that he was actually present. However, I don't think I don't think it's required that he had been there, since he got the information from his brother and knew about the information. And in fact, Mr. Witkin had been there. So I think if that information is kept from the jury, then they would be left to speculate that it never took place. That in fact, or would be able to speculate that somebody else erased the computer, because Mr. Hyman will come in and testify that he believes that the computer had been deleted, and he's a computer expert. He will be able to testify in that regard. There's things called F6s and zeros that he will be able to explain.
All right, and your offer then is that this would go to show that the computer actually was erased,
Yes,
and that this occurred sometime before Hyman was there.
correct.
All right, on that theory that the prosecution wants to establish that in fact the computer was erased and that whatever was going on when the defendant was there was after the computer had been erased. What is the defense response?
Your Honor, the prosecution will be able to show the computer has been erased from the testimony of Mr. Hyman, which the court has just ruled admissible because he is an expert and he is going to say that he looked at the computer and it had been professionally erased. Signorelli testified that on September 1st, Eric made some reference to his brother having had someone erase the computer. Now that was at a time when Eric was also saying he knew that if portions of a computer were not properly deleted, there was a way to access them. And the person that was there that day, that Hyman, was going to try and access those portions that had been computer. And he also goes on to say that this will that he was trying to find was one that would in fact partially disinherit him. Now, Eric's having knowledge on September 1st of his brothers having had someone erase the family will at some prior time. We don't know whether or not it's August 31st or at some other time. This after the fact knowledge does not make the testimony of Mr. Witkin admissible against him. There's no evidence that he was involved on the 31st, and there's no evidence that he was in any way responsible.
There's no evidence that he knew before Hyman tells me it was erased.
And there is no evidence that he knew the computer had been erased prior to Hyman telling him the computer had been erased. The conversation with Signorelli that Signorelli reported occurred after Hyman had told Eric the will wasn't there, it couldn't be found. There is certainly other evidence, the testimony of Mr. Hyman, tending to show that Eric did not adopt or join in Lyle's efforts to erase the will. And that is shown by his participation on the 31st, rather the 1st, in an attempt to find the will, and his statements to Signorelli that he knew that this will could still be accessed by a professional. So that I don't think that the theory advanced by the prosecution is one which would justify the admission of evidence of a rather extensive transaction that occurred on a date when Eric was not present, and to which there is no indication at all that Eric had any knowledge beforehand or was in any way involved in.
I might add one point, Mona, that the court heard in the Lyle instance
What's that?
that Lyle left town, left New Jersey, apparently to have this will erased by himself when he had been in the company of Mr. Winskowski, who had never met Eric, came back to Los Angeles, returned to New Jersey by himself, and talked to Winskowski about what he had done. There is no evidence whatsoever that Lyle told Eric what he was going to do.
All
Because
right.
it was, in fact, it looks like Lyle was hiding that from Eric because Eric goes back the next day to meet the computer expert that Carlos Menendez hired. So it looks like Lyle was doing an end run around Eric.
All right, well, number one, just on a procedural matter in the future, I don't expect both counsel to argue on these matters. You can communicate with your co-counsel so we don't have four lawyers arguing on a rather minor issue. All right, anything further at this point from the prosecution response? All right, I want to hear that you have the Haymans here this morning.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, I want to hear their testimony, and then I'll review the transcript and make a ruling before the Witkin testimony. All right, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, then let's get the jury out.
Here in LA that what I thought was his son, or I was thinking he was a grandfather, but that there was a killing and he wanted me to come up and look at a computer. He apparently had been there a couple of days earlier and looked at the computer and saw some files, stated that one of them was perhaps Menendez, something about maybe some documents and about a will. He tried to find information in that, but he didn't have the technical expertise or didn't know how to. So he wanted someone from Kelco to come up and see if we could retrieve any information.
Now, Carlos Menendez worked for Merck, which you indicated is a parent company for Kelco?
That's correct. Merck & Company is headquartered in New Jersey. Kelco is a specialty chemical division of Merck. We're headquartered in San Diego.
And that call was on August 31st, 1989?
That is correct.
Did you drive up to Beverly Hills the next day?
Yes. It seemed imperative, or he was real concerned that I get up there as soon as possible. He was real anxious about finding any of the information on there. And he asked, and I said, well, I could come up the next morning. Went ahead and cleared that with my boss and made plans to take that day off and go up to Beverly Hills.
And did you do so?
I did so, yes.
What time did you arrive at Beverly Hills?
I left close, and I arrived in Beverly Hills just around 11 o'clock, somewhere at that time. Was able to find the house without pretty much any difficulty, and went to the door and had a difficult time initially getting in there.
Was that at 722 North Elm Drive in Beverly Hills,
That is correct.
the Menendez house?
That is correct.
Now, when you originally arrived there, what did you see? Was someone waiting for you?
There was no one there. When I initially got there, there were some cars along, and I was able to park almost right in front of the house. I did have my wife with me at the time, and we both got out of the car and approached the front door. I believe I knocked or something, and there was a security guard or someone who met me there and stated that, asked what I was doing there. I said I was supposed to come up here and take a look at the computer. He said that I was not on any list. He didn't know who I was, and he told me if I needed to do that I needed to call the Bel Air Patrol or whatever security company and make sure that they granted permission for me to go there.
Did you then make some phone calls?
Yes, I did.
What did you do?
My wife and I went back in the car, and we drove up to Sunset. I went and found a payphone just not too far away and proceeded to make a series of calls. I first called the Bel Air Patrol or the Bel Air security company, and they didn't know had never heard of me. They didn't know of me being supposed to be on a list. They said if I was indeed supposed to, and that Carlos was a person that said he would put me on that list, I need to get hold of Carlos so that he could call them in. I then tried to call Carlos back in New Jersey. Was unsuccessful at reaching him at the office. I had his home number. I tried calling him there. Was initially unsuccessful there and waited a little bit, tried later. Probably about 45 minutes of time elapsed when I finally got hold of him, and he said that Eric was there waiting for me at the house to go there right away, in which case I did.
Okay, so you returned to the Menendez house.
That is correct.
Now, you indicated that you had your wife with you.
Yes, I did.
Is she also a computer expert?
She is not. She's a housewife. At the time, she was 8 months pregnant, and I don't know why I brought her up there, but we just thought I didn't know of anything about the case of any unusual circumstances. So I was thinking maybe after I was done, I'd go ahead and have lunch up here. We'd spend the afternoon here. So she does not have any computer knowledge at all. No.
Okay. You don't normally bring your wife on your calls?
It's very infrequent that I ever travel, actually, with my job. I support mainly the employees at the business site itself.
Mr. Hyman, after you returned to 722 North Elm, after you had made the calls back to New Jersey, was anyone waiting for you at that point?
Eric was up there at the front door, and there was another gentleman with him at that time when we both came up.
When you say Eric was at the front door, just for purposes of the record, would you identify who you're referring to?
Yeah, Eric Menendez sitting over here in the blue and white shirt.
Referring to the defendant at counsel table.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, you indicated that he had another person with him.
That is correct.
Was it, would you describe that person just generally? Was it a young person?
Yeah, it was a young person, I'd say roughly same age, obviously a friend. I was introduced to him, I know, at that time, along with my wife, but I would say that was Craig.
Have you seen this particular person since you were there September 1st, 1989?
I had seen him probably a few months after the incident and some of the publicity on the TV, and had recognized him at that time. And my wife and I said, yeah, that's the gentleman we saw with Eric. I really hadn't seen much of him since then, and I'd long forgotten his name. But however, with the publicity recently, I have seen pictures of him of late, and that is, and Craig is the person that was there at that time.
That's Craig Signorelli?
Craig Signorelli, yes.
Now, would you describe for the jurors what happened as you went up to the house and you saw defendant Eric Menendez with his friend Craig Signorelli?
Yeah, he greeted us at the door, and I said, I'm Ed Hyman, and I was to take a look at the computer, and he was obviously well aware of why I was there, and he basically led me into the house. I just went right past any security was there, and we went upstairs into the master bedroom. He showed me where the computer was there to the right, just inside that entrance, and I basically proceeded to turn on the computer, sat in the chair there with my wife next to me, and start looking at the files itself. I initially started off by doing just a command at the DOS prompt called DIR, or directory listing, just to see what was there. There were not many subdirectories or files there at that time. I then went ahead and proceeded to use some utilities from Norton. Utilities, one of which, the first one I used was Quick Undelete. That's a utility used to try and undelete any directories or any files that are there. The files, there was really nothing there worth interest, so I went to a more advanced utility called Norton Utilities, whereby I can actually see the directory listing, the FAT table, or the file allocation table, as well as each sector individually. And I spent probably 2 hours looking at one sector at a time, just seeing. I figured I was up there from San Diego. I'll do my best to see if I can find anything.
Did you find anything under the titles Menendez or Will?
I did not. Some of the files that I did see there was a directory for DOS, which is basic operating system on the PC. There was a couple other small application programs that really didn't mean anything. The one data file that I really did see had been deleted, but I was able to find it. It was still there. A couple paragraphs that seemed to be like a book report or something of the Renaissance period or something like that time frame. I continued going through the rest of the hard disk. There was no files that could be seen that were deleted that could have been retrieved at that point.
Was there anything on the computer which indicated to you that someone had deleted something on the computer?
Yes. as I was going through the computer, it was an older one, so I'd assumed it had been there for a couple of years, or for a while, I shouldn't say that. But there's a formatting that when you initially use the DOS operating system to format or prepare a hard disk for people to write to, it puts a code F6 throughout the entire disk. What I like to think of an analogy is if you had a blank piece of paper, when you format it, you're putting the lines across so that you can then write in there and understand it. As I was looking through it, the code that was there was all zeros, so that tended to tell me that whatever was deleted had been wiped out, and they overwrote the entire hard disk with the character 00.
Is that indicative of a certain type of program?
I wouldn't say a certain type of program, but it would mean that it was not just a normal format that had occurred from the DOS command when you normally prepare a hard disk. So to me, it means that that hard disk had been used, and for whatever reason, files or the hard disk was cleaned up using that utility. Probably a utility like Norton's wipe disk or wipe file.
The Norton wipe disk or file, does it replace the F6s with the zeros?
It can replace it with whatever you want, but the default is zeros. And the wipe disk will actually, the parameter that I would say was used would not delete any files that still existed. In other words, wiping the whole hard disk would just wipe out anything that had been deleted or had not been used, and it would write zeros over everything.
Mr. Hyman, while you were accessing the computer, do you know where Eric Menendez was at that point?
For the first 10 or 15 minutes, I would say he was there for most of the part at my side, kind of watching, and he was asking a few questions of what I was doing. Wanted to know if I was able to find any files that may have been deleted. Excuse me. At that time, and I generally had the feeling at that moment that he was.
Object, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Right, just wait for another question.
Certainly.
What was his demeanor at this point while you're initially accessing the computer?
I would say that he was very cordial. He didn't seem anxious or apprehensive about me being there. He seemed somewhat curious of, what I was doing, looking over, watching me doing that. But as he was calm and matter of fact.
At some point after doing your initial search, did you have any conversation with the defendant?
Well, he was asking me some questions as you're going on, wondering if files were deleted, can you retrieve them? And I replied that yes, files can be retrieved when they're normally deleted if it's just like a DOS delete. The reason for that is DOS simply writes over a special character in the first character of the name of a file in a directory listing. So under those circumstances, yes, most deleted files can be retrieved if the computer hasn't been used for a long time after that.
He specifically asked you that question about whether if something had been deleted, whether it could be retrieved?
That's correct.
Was your wife present when you made that statement to him and he responded?
Yes, she was.
Do you recall any conversation between the defendant, Eric Menendez, and his friend, Craig Signorelli, at that point?
At that point, I do not recall or believe that Craig was really right there near us at the time. We were there for an extended period of time, and I know that they had come back a couple of times. And then I spent a little time with them after the fact when we went to call Carlos to let him know the results. But I do recall them talking about different things, cars. I was that impression?
Objection, Your Honor.
Objection sustained in that it is not responsive. Ask the next question.
Mr. Hyman, what was it that you heard in your presence Eric Menendez talking about?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
You can answer.
On grounds of relevancy?
On the grounds of 402 rules.
All right, you may. All right, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Hyman, after you were at the Menendez house for a couple of hours trying to find information about the will, did you complete your search?
I went ahead and looked around on that desk for any floppy disks, thinking, well, maybe there might have been something on a floppy disk, a backup copy or something like that. I found a few right there where the computer was. I looked at them, searched at them. There was nothing of any value there. There was another desk on the other side of the bed. I went over there and just looked on the top and in a couple of drawers and realized I probably shouldn't be doing this and stopped and just went back and basically completed my search at that time, realizing that I had not found anything that Carlos had wanted me to come look for.
And did you report that back to Carlos Menendez?
Yes. Eric had come up with Craig and was wondering how things were doing. I basically said I think I was done and needed to use the phone. We went downstairs. He kind of showed me around the house real quick at that point, just showing me the home. And we went into the kitchen. In the back here, there was a phone there that we used. I called Carlos and told him that I wasn't able to find such directories that he thought were there or any files of the like. He was a little upset at me. He wanted, kept insisting, is there any way that you could retrieve anything if it was deleted? And I tried to explain to him that if it had just been deleted, yes, I might have been able to, but in my opinion, it looked like another program was used to clean the hard disk, and as a result of that, there was nothing I could do to retrieve any files that may have been there if there were in fact any there.
If the Norton wipe disk had been used, say the day before, would you have been able to retrieve anything the next day, the day that you were there?
No, I would not have been.
Would it be fair to say that defendant Eric Menendez and his friend Craig Signorelli were in and out of the room where you were accessing the computer during this 2-hour stay that you had?
That is correct. At one point, they came up and they invited my wife to show her the house while I was sitting there working on the computer, and they were gone for several minutes as he took them, I think, in the different rooms and showed them some of the different areas of the home.
When you left after trying to search for the will information, was Eric still at the house when you left the house?
Yes, he was.
Was Craig Signorelli still there?
Yes, he was.
Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ron.
Good morning, Mr. Hyman.
Good morning.
The information you got from Carlos Menendez was that he had recently been in Los Angeles. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And did Mr. Menendez tell you that he had been to the house and looked at this computer himself?
Yes, he did.
Did he tell you when he had been in Los Angeles?
He said that it was a couple of days earlier and that he had to come back because of business.
Now, do you recall Carlos Menendez telling you anything that he saw on the computer?
He said that he saw a file or a directory, Menendez, will, and something else like documents.
Okay. The third one being documents?
Documents, yes. I assume he may have meant like a subdirectory that might have had just personal files in there, like a word processor.
Did Carlos Menendez also tell you that although he had looked at the computer and found these directories, he didn't know how to retrieve them?
That is correct.
Did it appear to you from your conversation with him that Carlos Menendez was not knowledgeable about computers?
It sounded like he definitely was not, or at least didn't know the programs or was not very knowledgeable. That's correct.
All right. He was not able, apparently, to access these directories himself.
I had assumed that he at least had some basic knowledge of computers. He was able to turn it on and do some type of directory that he saw those files, but didn't know what word processor as an example to use to pull the data up.
Okay. And you had no way of knowing how accurate the information that he was giving you about what he saw on the computer was. Would that be fair to say?
That is correct.
So that your job was to go up and to try and find out what was on the computer and retrieve it and give it to Carlos.
That is correct.
During the conversation that you had with Carlos Menendez on August 31st, were you told that Eric would meet you at the house?
Yes, I was.
And that Eric would be the one that would let you into the house?
Yeah, he also said that he would contact security there to make sure that I was on the list so that I would be able to enter.
So you were aware when you went up there that there was some kind of a security company that was at the residence and maintaining control over who went in and out?
That's correct.
And when you arrived on September 1st, you found out that Carlos Menendez apparently had not put your name on the list for the security company.
That is correct.
And that was what caused you to have to go to the phone booth and make the phone calls, correct?
Correct.
Did you ask for Eric when you first arrived on September 1st, when you were not allowed access?
I couldn't say specifically remembering now. I would imagine I would have asked, being that was his name, but I don't recall.
Do you recall talking to the police about this in May of 1990?
That's correct.
Okay, and when you were interviewed to the police, do you recall telling them that when you first went there, you were told by the security guard that Eric wasn't at home?
That's probably correct, yes.
But you don't have any present recollection of that being the case?
Well, I would assume that if Eric was there, that I would have been informed of that and I would have been let in, yes.
Okay.
Because I know there was no one there to vouch for me. No one knew I was coming. No one saw me on a list or anything.
And your understanding was that Eric was going to be there to vouch for you and to say it was okay for you to come in?
That's correct.
Now, when you returned after your phone calls to New Jersey, you found Eric was waiting for you.
That is correct.
And was he waiting in the front yard?
I would say he was there out on the front porch waiting there.
And at that time, you said that he was with a friend.
Correct.
When you met with Eric, did you go immediately up to the master bedroom?
Yes, I would say we did.
And then you started right away to work on the computer, is that right?
That is correct.
And this was a computer that was located in the master bedroom.
Correct.
Was there a computer stand with a chair in front of it?
Yeah, they had it was a computer desk or something of that sort. It was an IBM PC, and they had a big sofa chair that was sitting in front that I was sitting in, yes. Okay.
Now, when you first got in and sat down, were you able to tell fairly quickly that this computer didn't have anything on it?
After turning it on and issuing the first command dir at the root drive, I could see immediately that the files or directories were not there. Because at that point, I tried to use some utilities to see if they'd been deleted and I could retrieve it.
All right. So this is something, the lack of any files or directories on the computer was something that you were able to ascertain right away.
That is correct.
And when you ascertained this, when you discovered it, did you tell Eric what you had discovered?
Well, I know that we were talking, and I know that he asked if I probably stated that I don't see any of the files that Carlos asked me to look for, and then I recalled him asking, well, if they're deleted, can you find them?
Okay, so when he asked you that if they were deleted, can you find them, that was after you had told him that there was nothing on the computer, correct?
To the best of my knowledge, that is probably how it happened, yes.
Okay. And you said that Eric and his friend were in there for about 10 or 15 minutes with you, and then they kind of wandered off.
Correct. I would recommend the first 10, 15 minutes that Eric was the one that I really remember being there at that time because he was standing next to me. Craig may have wandered off earlier or later.
Right. And it was during this first 10 or 15 minutes when Eric was standing by you that you talked. You told him that the files had been deleted, and he asked you whether or not they could be retrieved, even if they had been deleted.
That's
Is that correct? Now, did there come a time when your wife left the bedroom?
Yes, there was.
Okay, and about how long after you had arrived at the house did your wife leave the bedroom?
I would guess maybe a half an hour, something like that.
Okay, so it was relatively soon into your 2 hours at the residence, correct?
That's correct.
And did your wife leave the bedroom in order to take a tour of the house?
That's correct. She was invited to look at the house by Eric.
Eric invited her?
Correct.
And they left for some period of time?
That is correct.
How long were they gone?
I would guess several minutes, something like that.
Okay. Was the friend there when Eric invited your wife to come and look at the house?
Yes, he was.
Okay. And do you recall the friend leaving to look at the house along with your wife and Eric?
Yes, I would say he did.
Now let's talk about the friend for a moment. You called him by name today as Craig.
That is correct.
And to the best of your knowledge, when you were at the house on September 1st, were you introduced to the friend?
Yes, we were.
And you knew his name on September 1st, 1989, right?
That would be correct, yes.
When you were interviewed by the police on May 7th, 1990, did you tell them about the friend?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And were you able, in May of 1990, to tell the police what the friend's name was?
I was not.
Okay, because you had forgotten it, right?
Because I'd forgotten, and I've never been someone who's real good with names, period.
Okay.
Oh, certainly.
And were you interviewed by a defense investigator named Cynthia Erdely and Ms. Abramson in March of 1993? Can you see her over there?
Yes, I see her down there.
Okay.
And yes, I was interviewed by her at that time.
And when you talked to them in March of 1993, were you able to recall the name of the friend at that time?
At that time, I had not.
So something has happened between, say, 1993 in March and today that caused you to remember the name.
That is correct.
And is that seeing the person in the newspapers?
On television.
On television. So you saw a person on television who described the incident that you're now telling us about, right?
No, it just mentioned his name, that he was involved with the trial and testifying. It did not have to talk about his statement or anything he was saying in that trial.
Okay. And what, I believe you said television?
Correct.
What television was it that you looked at?
It was one of the primetime shows. It would have been a couple weeks ago. I was up in Portland at the time when I saw that. And that's when I saw the face and it just clicked. That was him.
Okay. Now let me ask you about what the person that you saw on September 1st looked like. You were able to see this person standing next to Eric, correct?
That is correct.
And can you tell us now whether the person that you saw on September 1st was about the same size as Eric or different?
I would say he would be similarly built as I recall, maybe a little shorter, but he did not stand out in any great difference.
Okay.
Similarly built
to Eric Menendez. Slender, young.
You recall this person as being slender?
To the best of my knowledge now, yes, I do.
Was he heavier than Eric?
Perhaps slightly. I really couldn't give you an answer.
You really don't
The
have
face.
a good memory of the friend, correct?
Not a great memory. I mean, most of my time concentrated was on the computer.
Okay. What about the friend's hair color? Do you recall what color his hair was?
My recollection right now is probably going to be tainted because of seeing it on TV. I'm going to say it's a sandy brown, but to me, it was the face. I saw it, and that was him. And that's all I saw on television.
When you were interviewed on March 31st, 1993 by Cynthia Erdely and Ms. Abramson, did you tell them that the person that you saw with Eric had a heavier build than Eric?
We may have. I think
Okay, and was this heavier build your best recollection on March 31st, 1993?
that could be, yes.
Okay, and that was also your best recollection before you saw this television show, right?
I was never asked to describe or never really thought about it much before that, no.
Okay, but before you saw the television show, your best recollection was that the friend had a heavier build than Eric.
Perhaps, yes.
Okay. Did you also tell Miss Abramson and Cynthia Erdely that the friend's hair color was lighter than Eric's.
Yes, we did believe it was.
Okay, and that was your best recollection as of March of 1993.
Correct.
Okay, and that was your best recollection before you saw the television show, correct?
I would say yes, but I mean, it was not something we thought of very much. It's been a long time.
Well, you've said, Mr. Hyman, that you think that you may be influenced somewhat by the television show and seeing the person on TV.
Well, in my description, perhaps speaking now versus when I did March 31st, yes.
Okay. What about the eyes of the friend? Do you remember what color eyes he had?
I do not.
Okay. Did you tell Miss Abramson and Cynthia Erdely that this friend had light-colored eyes?
My wife and I were both speaking together. She may have, I may have. I don't recall
Okay.
that.
But in any event, that's not your recollection of how you described the friend.
That's correct.
Now, I think you described Eric that day as being cordial.
Yes, he was very polite. Welcomed us right into the house, took me right to the computer.
And he was rather matter-of-fact about the events that day?
That's correct.
Did you also, Mr. Hyman, tell us that this was an older model computer?
Yes.
Okay. And what you found on the computer was, you believed to be a book report?
It looked something like that just by what it was about, yes.
Was that like a high school report that you do for a class?
That was my impression, yes.
Okay, and were you able to access that book report?
Yes, I was. Like I say, it was a few paragraphs long, and that was it.
Now, you said that after searching on the computer for a period of about 2 hours, you then said that you needed to use the phone.
That's correct.
And you were taken down to the kitchen.
Correct.
Was the friend with you when you went down to the kitchen?
Yes, he was.
And it was in the kitchen that you called Carlos Menendez.
That is correct.
Was the friend with you when you made the phone call to Carlos Menendez?
Yes, he was.
Okay, so he was right there.
That is correct.
And he was there when you had this conversation with Carlos, and Carlos was upset, correct?
Yes, he was. Yeah, he had hoped that I would be able to give him some information or tell him that I found it.
Okay. And Carlos also said that he wanted to talk to Eric.
That is correct. He did talk to Eric.
And you put Eric on the phone.
That is correct.
And then you remained for some period of time while Eric and Carlos appeared to have a conversation.
That is correct.
And during this conversation, Eric was saying certain things to Carlos.
Yeah, it sounded to me that Eric or Carlos was real mad at Eric, and I thought they got in a fight. The voices got louder, or at least on Eric's side, I could tell that he was being defensive, and I don't want to say yelling, but something like that. And he did make this statement to the fact that I don't know what happened, or it's not my fault. I didn't do it.
Okay. And when Eric was having this defensive conversation with Carlos, was the friend also there?
Yes, he was.
So he was able to see and hear this as well,
To my collection, yes, he would have been.
because he was right there in the kitchen.
What's the answer?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry about that.
Is it also correct, Mr. Hyman, that Eric did not appear to be apprehensive about you or what you were doing there on September 1st?
Yeah, that was my overall impression. I mean, we initially came in there. He greeted us warmly. He basically left me alone for the most part of the time that I was there and was just in and out. Wasn't hovering over or anything. He was very cordial and polite to us, offered my wife a glass of water and things.
All right. Thank you very much. May I just have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. I have nothing to say.
All right, any redirect on these matters?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Hyman,
May 7th, 1990, was that the first time that you had spoken to the police regarding this case?
Yes, it is.
And do you recall which detective you spoke to? Was it Linehan or Zoller?
Linehan.
On that date, you gave them information regarding the friend being with Eric on
That's
that
correct.
date.
That is correct.
That is September 1st.
Correct.
And you indicated that you're not good with names.
That is
Right.
correct.
Sometime after being at Menendez's house and meeting Eric Menendez and his friend, did you see this friend on television?
It was a few months after. It was, I would assume, a hard copy type show or something. And my wife and I were watching TV, and we did see him, and we both said that was the friend who was with Eric when we were up there.
And that was Craig Signorelli?
And that was Craig Signorelli. Yes.
Now, you referred to another time when you saw something on television more recently.
That is correct.
Is that correct? And you indicated that the defense came to interview you on, I think the date was March 31st of 93?
That is correct.
Sometime after speaking with Miss Abramson and their investigator, did you see Craig Signorelli again on television?
Yes, I did.
Okay. You indicated that although you're not good with names, you are good with faces. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it your testimony that the person that was with Eric Menendez on September 1st, 1989 was Craig Signorelli?
Yes, that is my testimony.
Here, and I have a photograph. It appears to be of a bedroom with a TV set and a computer in the background. I have this marked as the next exhibit in order, which is 63.
Yes.
Thank you. Can I approach now?
Yes.
Mr. Heyman, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 63. Do you recognize what's shown in that photograph?
Yes, I do.
What does that appear to be?
In the corner of the room is an IBM PC that I worked at, along with the sofa chair that I had sat in. We pulled that over in front. So that's the computer.
Would it be fair to say that when you were working on the computer that you were actually facing the computer?
That is correct.
So you were facing the corner of that particular room?
Yes, I was facing the corner of the room.
When you were talking to Eric Menendez, did you have your back to him?
Yeah, I was facing the computer, so I was sitting right here. My wife was kind of behind me by the arm of the chair, and Eric was to my left and just a little behind me.
Behind you.
Yes.
And Craig Signorelli was in the room as well?
Yes, he was.
When there was a discussion about something in the will or something in a computer being deleted, and he asked the question of whether it could be retrieved, did you have your back to him at that point?
Occasionally, I may have glanced at him, but for the most part, I was talking more towards the computer.
But your wife was with you at that.
But my wife was with me at that time, yes.
But nothing further at this time, then.
All right. Regarding the matter that we discussed at the sidebar, did you want to pursue that with a witness outside the presence of the jury?
Yes.
All right.
There is another witness as well, but I may be able to. I think I'm finished with this witness. If I could have a few minutes with the next witness.
Yes. Okay. Any further cross?
Yes,
All right.
a couple questions. Mr. Heyman, you saw the television show, the first television show with the friend before speaking with the police on May 7th, 1990, right?
That is correct.
And when you spoke with the police on May 7th, 1990, you at that time didn't remember the friend's name.
That's correct. Probably 4 or 5 months had passed.
All right. And you were not able to tell them anything about the person other than to describe him as a friend, correct?
That is correct.
All right, thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else this time?
No, you're right.
Okay. Are you ready with the next witness, or do you need a few minutes?
I can have a few minutes.
Okay, we'll take a short break, ladies and gentlemen, and it shouldn't be very long, so I'll impose upon you and ask that you go into the jury room, and we'll resume at 20 minutes to the hour. Don't discuss the case with anyone or form any opinions about it, and we'll resume in 15 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. People call Deborah Hyman.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in the cause of things before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please take the stand and repeat your name for the record.
Deborah Hyman,
Could you spell both names, please?
DeborahHayman.
All right, Mr. Kuriyama?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mrs. Hyman, directing your attention to September 1st of 1989, do you recall accompanying your husband to Beverly Hills from San Diego?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And do you recall going to 722 North Elm in Beverly Hills?
Yes.
Was there, did you go to the house several times before you actually were able to locate the person you were to meet?
A couple times we went there and then we had to go to a phone booth to call so that we could get in.
Okay, can we adjust this microphone a little bit? Available.
Okay.
Okay.
Mrs. Hyman, after making the phone calls, or your husband making the phone calls, did you return to the Menendez house?
Yes, we did.
And did you see somebody waiting for you and your husband?
Yes.
Who was that?
It was Eric and his friend.
And when you say Eric, just for the record, would you identify who you're talking about?
Right here.
What color is the person wearing today?
Blue tie.
Referring to the defendant.
Thank you, Your Honor. You indicated that the defendant, Eric Menendez, was with a friend at that point.
Correct.
What did you and your husband do upon arriving at that house?
Eric let us in, and my husband basically went to work on the computer, and I went upstairs with them, and I sat there with him most of the time.
Do you recall a discussion about deleting a will and retrieving a will?
Yes.
You do. Okay, do you recall approximately when that was, and the time that you were there, that occurred?
On my recollection, it's vague because it was, 4 years ago. My husband was going in through the computer, and he wasn't able to find anything. And Eric had just asked, "Can you retrieve a file after it's been deleted?" And Ed had said something like, if it wasn't deleted by tools or something like that. And I mean, that was weird. Eric just seemed kind of, I don't know, uptight or worried.
Okay, when-
All right, objection sustained. The latter part of the answer, starting with Eric, appeared as stricken as not responsive.
When the information that was given by your husband regarding the retrieval of deleted information on a computer, did Eric Menendez's demeanor change at all that you saw yourself?
I thought so.
What did you see?
Well, I thought he looked sort of worried. Now, I had no idea why.
Okay. And Mrs. Hyman, you spoke to the police on June 5th, 1990. Do you recall that?
I'm not for certain on exact days, but I do recall.
Was it sometime after your husband had spoke to them on May 7th, 1990?
Yes.
Do you recall what Eric Menendez's demeanor was like prior to getting the information that you just related to the jurors? That is, prior to the information about the retrieval or possible retrieval of deleted information, what was his demeanor like?
I would say he was casual. He was very nice. He seemed very easygoing.
And his demeanor changed upon hearing this information from your husband?
Objection.
Overruled. Your
You mean-
answer?
Oh, yes.
And what did you indicate with respect to his demeanor?
Objection.
Right, we have a amplification of what it is that her husband said, and then what, if anything, she saw in the defendant's reaction.
Mrs. Heyman, do you understand what the question is?
Yes.
What is it that your husband, what discussion did your husband have with the defendant, Eric Menendez, regarding the deletion of information and the possible retrieval of information?
Well, I remember basically my husband going through saying everything's been deleted, and Eric asking, is it possible to be retrieved once it's been deleted? And my husband said something to the sort, yes, it can be, but if it's used with utilities to wipe it clean or whatever, it can't be retrieved.
What did you notice about Eric Menendez's reaction to that?
I thought he looked a little bit worried
Okay.
at that point.
Is your memory is a little bit less than what you had back in June of 1990? Would that be fair to say?
Yes,
Would it refresh your present recollection and take a look at the report that you gave June 5th, 1990?
yes.
May I approach, Sharon?
Yes.
You just read this section to yourself. Mrs. Heyman, does that refresh your present recollection?
Yes.
What is it? Would you describe Eric Menendez's demeanor after getting this information that you testified to?
Which information?
The information about the possible retrieval of information that had been deleted.
I guess I thought he looked scared or worried.
And that's what you reported to the police?
Yes.
Now, with respect to the friend of Eric Menendez that was there that day, September 1st, 1989, did you have a conversation with your husband a couple of months after you both had been to Beverly Hills to the Menendez house regarding seeing somebody on television?
Yes. I don't recall when it was on television. I mean, I don't recall if it was 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month afterward. But we saw, it went on one of the media hard copy or something like that. And we had seen Eric and the friend that we had seen. And his name was Craig. That's what they said. And that was the gentleman that I saw Eric with.
On September 1st, 1989.
Right.
I have nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, Mrs. Heyman.
Hi.
Mrs. Heyman, let me just try and clarify. You said that your husband told Eric that something that had been deleted could be retrieved unless somebody had used a tool to do the deletion.
Right.
Correct? And it was after finding out this information, including the possibility that information could not be retrieved if a tool had been used, that Eric appeared to be concerned. Is that correct?
Yes, it was after my husband basically said it could be retrieved. He looked concerned.
Okay, but you said today that your husband also told Eric, when he told them that it could be retrieved, he said, but if it had
Right.
been deleted with a tool, it can't be retrieved, right?
Correct.
And he told him this at the same time he gave him the information about being able to retrieve the information if it had just been deleted, right?
Correct.
Okay, so it was two parts to the information your husband was giving Eric, right?
I guess you can say that.
Okay, well, I want you to say it, if it's correct.
Yes.
Okay. And it was after this kind of two-part information that your husband gave to Eric, then you noticed some change in his demeanor. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and this happened when you were in the bedroom,
Right.
when your husband was working on the computer. Right?
Yes.
You have to answer out loud.
Okay.
Okay? Mrs. Hyman, would it be, well, you were at the house on September 1st, correct? 1989.
I'm sure that was a date because it was the only day that I was there. I just never
You
wrote
don't
it
know
down.
the date yourself.
Right.
And by the way, you don't know the address yourself. Mr. Kuriyama asked you if you went to 722 North Elm. Do you remember that address?
I remember North Elm because we had stopped.
Okay. Between the time you went to the house in September and the time you were first interviewed by the police, did you find out or did you come to know that Eric and his brother had been arrested for killing their parents?
Yes.
Okay. And when you found out that information, did that change the way you felt and thought about the visit on September 1st, 1989?
Well, naturally, we were scared. However, we were scared after we left anyways because we didn't have any idea what had happened.
Okay. This was kind of an adventure that you and your husband went
Right.
on,
We didn't know
right?
how they were killed or anything. I mean, I don't even know why I went up there. I
You
shouldn't
knew-
have.
You knew when you went up that somebody had died.
Right.
Okay. Now, let me ask you about the news of the arrest, okay? Did that change or color the way you remember the events in September of 1989?
Overall.
No.
Okay, you didn't have any reaction to hearing about it?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
But I felt the same way that I did after that I heard the news.
Okay. Now, you said when you first arrived at the house, you weren't able to get in, right?
Correct.
And you returned about an hour later, and that was when you saw Eric for the first time?
Yes.
Where was Eric when you first saw him?
As I recall, he was waiting either at the entrance of the gate or right by the house. He let us in.
Okay, and was he alone when you first saw him, or was he with somebody else?
He was with his friend.
Okay, so the friend was there as well. Is that right?
Yes.
And is
that's right.
that where you met the friend?
Correct.
Okay, and when you met the friend, did somebody tell you the friend's name?
I'm surely they did. I'm bad at names. I'm very good at faces. I just did not recall the name.
Okay, when you were interviewed by the police on June 5th, I believe, 1990, you weren't able to tell them the friend's name, correct?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Would it help to look at the report about your interview with the police on June 5th, 1990?
Sure.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Would you just look at this and read it to yourself and see if that helps you remember whether you were able to tell them the friend's name?
No,
So you had forgotten the friend's name at least on June 5th, 1990.
correct.
And the police didn't ask you to describe the friend in any way.
No,
Did the friend go upstairs with you and your husband to the master bedroom?
yes,
And there your husband began his work?
yes.
Yes. And did the conversation that you just told us about, that your husband giving Eric this two parts of information, did that happen pretty soon after your husband got up there and began working on the computer?
I would say probably in the first half an hour.
Okay. And during the first half hour, did Eric and his friends stay in the bedroom with you?
I believe so. He had offered me a glass of water or a drink, and I remember him showing me around the house.
Okay. Was this during the first half hour or was it after that time?
I can't be absolutely certain.
Okay. At some time you left with Eric to look at the house.
Correct.
And did the friend go with you to look at the house?
I can't be absolutely certain if he was right there when he was showing me around the house.
Okay, you're not sure that he accompanied you.
Right.
Were Eric and the friend in the bedroom during most of the time that you were there at the house, or did they come and go?
They came and went.
Okay, so they weren't standing there watching everything, but they kind of went on their own
Right.
business. How long were you at the house that day, Mrs. Hyman?
I'd say approximately 2 hours.
Now, during the time you were at the house, were you able to look at the friend and see him stand next to Eric?
Yes.
And were you able to see how tall the friend is, at least in relation to Eric?
It seems so long ago. I thought that he was like of medium build, heavy, a little heavier set. Not heavy set, but medium. Dark sandy hair, maybe 5'8", 5'9", not real tall.
Okay, so this was a person who was about 5'8" or 5'9"?
I'm guessing.
Okay. Is your recollection that this person was the same size as Eric or a different size?
I can't honestly remember.
Okay. And I believe you told us that he had a build that was medium. Is that how you described it?
Yeah.
Okay. How did that build compare with Eric's? That is, was this person heavier than Eric?
Yes, but he wasn't heavy. He was just, I don't know, he looked like he worked out.
This person looked like he lifted weights and had muscles and...
Could be.
Okay. And you said that his hair was what color?
I recall either dark sandy, between sandy and darker.
Okay. When we're talking about sandy and darker, are we talking brown or blonde?
I thought it was in between brown and blonde.
Okay. Do you remember talking to Miss Abramson, who you can see there, I think, and a defense investigator on March 31st, 1993?
Yes.
And did they ask you what this friend looked like?
Yes.
Okay. And you recall telling them in March that the friend was taller than Eric?
I don't know how tall he is.
Okay. Do you recall telling them that he had a heavier, bigger build than Eric?
Yeah.
Okay, because that's your memory of what this friend looked like.
Right.
And do you recall telling them that his hair was dark blonde or light brown?
That's it. Yeah, that's in between blonde and brown.
Okay, so we're talking about sandy or dark brown. Another way of describing that would be dark blonde or light brown. Right?
Correct.
Okay. Do you know, what color the friend's eyes were?
I have no idea.
Do you remember describing the friend for Ms. Abramson and the investigator and telling them that his eyes were hazel or light colored?
I may have. I can't say for certain that was his color.
Okay. Now, it would be correct to say that your memories of this friend are somewhat influenced by seeing someone 2 times on television. Is that correct?
I remember the gentleman that I did see on TV. I recall it to be him because my husband and I, before any of this investigation even happened, and I don't remember if it was 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month that we saw it, but we looked at each other and said, that's the friend that Eric was with.
Okay, let me back up and ask you about that particular TV show. Okay, it was before you ever talked to the police, right?
Correct.
And yet it was after you had heard about the arrests.
It was just going on.
All right.
I don't
And
even know if we heard about the arrest yet.
there was someone on the TV that was depicted or described as a friend of Eric.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. Was this person being interviewed or did you just see a picture of him?
I think there were a couple. I think he was speaking in one, and then I just saw a glimpse of him walking forward towards the camera.
Now, just focusing on this the first television show that you saw, how many friends of Eric did you see on the show?
I only recalled one because it was the one that I saw.
Okay, so there was just one person on that show that was described to be a friend, right?
Right.
And you don't remember whether that's a prime time or you don't remember the type
No,
of
it was
the show?
one of those like hard copy or something like that. Not exactly sure.
Now, after the interview with the defense investigator and Ms. Abramson in March of 1993, you saw another TV show. Is that right?
Could you repeat the question?
Did you see a TV show with this friend pictured after the interview with Ms. Abramson?
Yes, I have seen something since.
Okay. And on that TV show, you saw the same friend that you had seen on the prior TV show.
Yes.
Did seeing that TV show help you in your own mind describe the friend that you saw or that you thought you saw previously?
I mean, it was the same guy that
Okay.
I remember seeing
Okay. It was the same guy you remember seeing on the first TV show?
at his house.
Okay. Do you remember the person that you saw on the second TV show
Same.
as being the one on the first TV
Yes.
show? And on the second TV show, was this friend talking to the, or was he just, it was a still photograph, if you remember?
It wasn't a still photograph. I don't recall if he was talking or if he was walking. One I thought was pictured with Eric and him walking.
Okay. Do you
I don't know if
remember
that was.
whether or not on the second TV show there was more than one person described as a friend of Eric who was pictured and who was shown?
No, I don't. I mean, all I focused on the person that I thought I saw at the house. I didn't pay attention to anything else.
Right. So you don't know or you don't believe there were any other friends that you saw pictured on the second television show?
I'm sure if there were, I'm sure he has other friends. I just focused on the one friend that I saw. And I mean,
Okay, but did you see any other friends? I mean, aside from what you
no,
assumed
no, I
about him
didn't.
having
I didn't
friends.
notice any other friends.
Okay, so there was just that one friend
That's
on TV.
That's the only person I noticed.
All right. Thank you very much. I have nothing further.
Any redirect?
Thank you, Hannah.
So it's by remembering the face of Eric Menendez's friend that was there on September 1st, 1989, that you recall being shown on television, Craig Signorelli. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, were you pregnant on this day, September 1st, 1989?
Yes.
How, were you obviously pregnant?
8.5 months.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Okay, thank you. You may step down. You're excused. Let me see counsel at the sidebar, please. All right, what I'm going to do is discuss some matters with the lawyers, ladies and gentlemen, and as soon as that is completed, we'll give you the word as far as what we're going to be doing this morning. So if you would just go back in the jury room, it should be more than 5 minutes, and then we'll give you the word. We'll discuss this case with them and inform any things about it. I'll be back very shortly. All right, the jurors have left the courtroom, and counsel indicated that the next witness is Mr. Witkin, who did testify before the grand jury and is proposed to be a witness who will testify before both juries. At least that is the proposal of the prosecution. And the defense has stated its objection to that testimony. Referring back to the testimony of the Haymans just for a moment, that matter was the subject of substantial discussion prior to the testimony of Mr. Signorelli, and that occurred in the hearing of July the 23rd, 1993. And the court at that time indicated that the reference to Mr. Signorelli would be admitted, and further the reference the testimony of Mr. Signorelli in reference to the Haymans would be admitted, and also the conversation that occurred between Signorelli and the defendant relating to someone else having arrived to erase the will, having been hired by the defendant's brother. That hearing did not involve the proposal to have Mr. Witkin testify before both juries, and it's my recollection that at some point in these proceedings, the prosecution indicated that it would not be using Mr. Witkin against the Eric Menendez, or in the Eric Menendez case, and now has changed its position and wants to do that. Is that right?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. The issue, or one of the issues, relates to activity of a co-defendant or another person after the crime offered to perhaps show the state of mind of the defendant on trial. This is in nature of activities of a co-conspirator introduced against another member of the conspiracy for the purpose of implicating the defendant conspirator in the activities of the co-conspirator. And there has been some litigation on that, some discussion of it, no real resolution, because much of that litigation dealt with whether there would be one or two juries. And if there was one jury, the theories would be different and evidence would be different than if there were two juries. The other issue relating to Mr. Witkin's testimony has to do with what actually he did, what actually was on the computer prior to his arrival, and and inferentially, if there was something on the computer prior to his arrival, whether that was something that was available to the defendant as a member of the household, and something that he would have been privy to and had knowledge of prior to the commission of the murders or homicide in this case. And that's a separate issue. One issue has to do with whether Mr. Eric Menendez would be bound by the conduct of his brother in hiring someone to come to Los Angeles to deal with the computer. And the second issue is what actually was on the computer. Those are two separate issues. What I propose to do at this point, without hearing further argument, is have Mr. Witkin testify before the Lyle Menendez jury, so I have a full feel for what it is that his testimony will entail on both of these subjects before a decision is made as to whether he would be permitted to testify on any of the matters before the Eric Menendez jury, since the testimony in the grand jury was rather brief, and perhaps the testimony here will be more fleshed out than it was before the grand jury. I would have a better means of dealing with whether his testimony in any form would be admissible against the defendant, Eric Menendez. So far, the jury has been made aware that Eric Menendez made statements to Craig Signorelli about his knowledge of what Lyle Menendez did. That goes to Eric Menendez's state of mind, and his state of mind at the time the Haymans were at the house, and reflecting on his concern for what would or would not be found when the Haymans looked at the computer. That goes to the defendant's state of mind and is a separate issue from what, if anything, can be attributed to Eric Menendez by reason of evidence admitted and relating primarily to what Lyle Menendez actually did. And I'm assuming from these discussions that the defendant, Eric Menendez, is not taking the position. I'm assuming from these discussions that Eric Menendez is not taking the position and would not take the position before the jury that Mr. Witkin did not come to the house and did not erase the will or did not erase the computer, that there would be no argument that those events did not happen.
That's correct.
Right. So that's how I propose to proceed at this point, just to get as much information from Mr. Witkin as will be brought out during the direct and cross before the Lyle Menendez jury. I don't notice counsel for Lyle Menendez here. I assume they are. And so what I'm going to do is excuse let me ask how long you think it'll take for the testimony of Mr. Witkin before the Lyle Menendez jury?
25 minutes.
Okay, what I'm going to do then is excuse this jury until 1:30, the Eric Menendez jury until 1:30, and then we'll have the Lyle Menendez jury come in. And counsel for Eric Menendez can certainly watch as the testimony proceeds in the audience section. As soon as we then excuse Eric Menendez, well, before we do that, counsel, you can stay here and I'll excuse the jury until 1:30, and then we'll have the defendant leave. So let's get the jury out, please. All right, the jurors are all here, and what I'm going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is deal with some matters that relate only to the Lyle Menendez jury for the balance of the morning. So what I'm going to do is excuse you now and have you return at 1:30. Don't discuss this case with anyone or form any opinions about it, and if you would return to this court at 1:30. And then we'll proceed with further testimony at that time. And don't speculate or be concerned about what goes on while you're not in the courtroom. It'll only relate to the other defendant at this point. All right, thank you, and we'll see you back here at 1:30. In the trial of People versus Lyle Menendez, he is in court with his attorneys. The people are represented, and the jury for this defendant is in the jury room. And are the parties ready to proceed with the next witness?
Yes.
And there are no matters to be heard prior to that witness's testimony. So we'll have the witness come out, or first of all, the jury come out. I'll greet them, and then we'll deal with the next witness. And the jurors are now in the courtroom in the case of People versus Lyle Menendez. Good morning to you all. And welcome back. Let me ask, before we get started here, question that I've been asking and will be asking throughout the trial, and that relates to whether any of you have seen or heard anything about this case in any source or from anybody or from in any way other than what's going on here in the courtroom. if anybody has, whether it's been in discussions with anyone else or hearing someone talk about it or seeing news coverage, television coverage in any way or anything, newspapers, anything, would you raise your hand? All right, nobody has. Okay, we'll now proceed with the testimony of the next witness. You may call that witness to the witness stand, please.
People call Howard Witkin to the stand, please.
My name is Howard Brian Witkin. Witkin.
Mr. Witkin, what do you do for a living, please?
I'm a computer consultant.
What does a computer consultant do?
My company provides emergency response service and support for people with computer systems. People call us up and we'll go and solve problems for them. We'll install systems, fix systems, repair systems, sell them, advise them what they should or shouldn't buy.
Do you own a company called Leviathan Development?
Yes, I do. I have partners, but I'm president and one of the principal stockholders.
And is Leviathan Development located in what part of the city, please?
We're in West Los Angeles.
And what kind of training do you have in computers?
About 10 years of having worked on them in the field. I have a bachelor's degree in applied mathematics with a specialization in computability in computers from UCLA. And then I've been providing network service and support since 1984.
Now, when we're talking about computers, do you specialize in just the IBM type of computer, or Apple as well?
Primarily IBM type computers, IBM compatibles.
On August the 31st of 1989, about 1:30 in the afternoon, were you inside of your car in the city of Beverly Hills?
Yes, I was.
And did you get a phone call in your car asking you to go somewhere?
Yeah, I received a page from my office. I called the office and spoke to my dispatcher. And he said that he'd received an emergency call from a gentleman in Beverly Hills who needed to have some files recovered off of a computer system. It needed to be done that afternoon as he was leaving on a flight for the East Coast in a few hours. And since I was 3 or 4 blocks away, could I take that call?
And what did you do?
So I took the phone number, wrote down the name and the number. I wrote down it was a Lyle Mendez. I wrote the name down incorrectly. Called him on my car phone, told him that I was a few blocks away and would be over in a few minutes, and proceeded to, I believe the address was 722 North Elm. Proceeded to their home.
And did you park on the street?
Parked on the street, across the street, directly across from the house.
Okay. Did you have any difficulty in getting admitted to the house?
When I got out of my car and walked up to the home, it was a series of locked gates with armed security guards, like Bel Air Patrol type guards. When I walked up to the gate, they asked me who I was. I told them that I was Howard Witkin. I was there to see Lyle Menendez. He corrected me, said it was Menendez, and told me to wait a second. He would go get him.
And did, in fact, he go and get Lyle Menendez?
And so he went into the house, and a moment later, Lyle came out of the house. They let me in the gate. He escorted me into the home.
Okay. Do you see Mr. Lyle Menendez in court here today, please?
Yes, I do.
And what color top is he wearing?
Kind of greenish, grayish. I don't know. What color is it?
Indicating.
It's this gentleman here.
He's referring to the defendant at counsel table, Lyle Menendez.
Thank you. Once you gained entry into the house, where did you go?
Lyle escorted me upstairs into a bedroom and showed me the computer, which was an IBM XT computer, immediately to the right of the door. He stepped in the door, and to your right in the corner was the computer.
And when you say it's an IBM XT, that means the manufacturer of the computer was an IBM?
The manufacturer of the computer was an IBM, and it was an older model of computer.
Your Honor, I have here an exhibit which has been marked as Exhibit 63. May I approach the witness, please?
Yes.
Mr. Witkin, I'm showing you a photograph, and I'd like to ask you if you recognize the room which is depicted in the photograph.
Yes, I do.
Do you see a computer in that photograph?
Yeah, this is the room that I came into, and this is the computer off in the corner. And you can tell it's an XT by the fact that the front of the computer is black disk drives instead of gray disk drives.
Okay, by the disk drive, do you mean the entry for where you put the...
Where you put the little floppy disks. So that is the computer that I worked on.
All right, now, Mr. Witkin, before you began to work on the computer, did someone ask you to do something with the computer?
Yeah, when I arrived, is when we walked upstairs, I asked Lyle what it was that he needed me to do, what he was trying to accomplish. And what he told me is that he had a series of files that he desperately needed to recover. that they had been erased or damaged, and he needed those files, and could I please try to find them on the computer for him?
Did he identify the names of the files?
Yeah, as I remember it was 4 names: Lyle, Eric, Will, and Menendez.
Now, for those of us here who are not very computer literate, could you give us a very basic rundown of what a file is inside of a computer?
Yeah, when you work on a computer, when you run like a program like a word processor, like WordPerfect, or a spreadsheet like Lotus, the information that you create, you sit at the keyboard and you type in, let's say you want to write a letter to a friend. So you sit at the keyboard like a typewriter and you type the letter, and it will save it on the computer's hard disk in a file with a name. So when you're done, you say, I want to save this file. I want to save my work that I've done. It will ask you for a name, and you'll say Lyle or Eric, whatever you want to name the file. Hit a key, and it will save it on the hard disk so that you have a semi-permanent magnetic record of that information.
Now, what is a hard disk?
A hard disk is a device. It's a component in a computer that allows for permanent storage or semi-permanent storage of information. There's 2 ways that a computer can store information. One is called RAM, which is electronic memory, and it's only usable when the computer is turned on. So like when you're working on your program, while you're typing it, it keeps it in RAM. It keeps it in the power on memory. But if you want to keep it till the next day, you want to have something that will keep it when you turn the computer off, when you turn the power off. So they've created something that's magnetic, which is a floppy disk or a hard disk, which will store the information in a more permanent fashion. So I can turn the computer off and it will hold the information until the next time I turn it on.
Did you, in fact, attempt to access the hard disk of the computer, which is shown in Exhibit 63?
Yes, I did.
And how did you do that?
Once he gave me the names of the files that he wanted to find, the first thing I did is I sat down and I typed a directory. The way a computer stores information on a hard disk is it keeps a list of files. As if you were keeping a file drawer, you would have each file folder and you'd write the name of a file and store it. So what I did is I sat down at the computer and first looked. The simplest way was just to look and see the names of every file on the hard disk. And there's a little software program you can run that will show you every single file anywhere on the hard disk and show you the name of the file. Because the simplest way people lose files is they just misplace them. They move them to a different list. They put it in the wrong drawer, so to speak. So the first thing I did was look to see whether the file existed.
All right, now you said something about you had a program to look to see what was on the hard disk. Is that correct?
Yeah, the first tool I believe I used was Xtree. First I used just the standard DOS, the standard operating system.
Now,
All right,
okay, you're starting to talk computerese, all right? Could you explain what DOS is?
All right, DOS is the basic, it's the very elementary program that tells a computer how to act like a computer. One of the wonderful things about a computer is you can make it do anything. I mean, I can use a computer as an imitation airplane, so I can sit and look at a screen and play. I can use it as a game. I can use it to write letters. You can basically do anything with it. The thing that tells the computer how to be an IBM computer is something called a disk operating system, DOS. And it's the very, very basic program. There's a certain set of commands or things you can tell it to do. One of which is something called dir, D-I-R, which says, give me a list of every file.
Okay, now, if a file has been deleted from the directory, is there a way to see if it's still stored inside of the computer?
Yeah, in fact, the way DOS deletes a file. So for example, when I create a file, it writes it magnetically onto the hard disk. So now the information is stored as a series of ones and zeros on a hard disk. And then it has another place, which is this index, the list of what's there. When I delete a file, it doesn't actually touch the data. When I say delete or erase a file, it leaves the information on the disk. It just goes to the list and changes the name of the file in the index to like a question mark. So for example, if you have, take a telephone book, the yellow pages. If I want to hide your information, or if I want to erase your information, I don't have to actually take the information out. If I just change the first letter of your name to a question mark, it makes it very difficult to find it again.
All right, so let me stop you for a second. Then if you had deleted the file from the directory, okay, the directory is what you turn on the computer, you write dir, and it will
show you a list of what's on the computer.
If I delete a file, when I turn the directory on, the name won't be on there anymore.
Right, the file will be on the disk, but the name won't appear on the directory.
So is there a way by which you can go into the hard drive and ask it to give you all the files that had been deleted before?
Right, so there's a tool called Norton Utilities that
Okay,
I
now-
used.
Norton, is that spelled N-O-R-T-O-N?
Norton Utilities.
Is that a program?
That is a program. It's,
Now, in relationship to the 4 items that you were asked to look for, did you look for them in the directory?
first, I looked for them in the directory.
Did you find them in the directory?
I found a couple of the names of the file. Like I found a file called Menendez as an example. But when I looked at the actual file, what the file contained was a printout of the directory that someone or somehow had managed to already erase the file, but not by telling it, please erase me, by copying something else over the top of it.
Now, you said you found the word Menendez in the directory.
As a file name.
Okay, did you find any other file names in the directory?
I also believe I found Will, Eric, and Lyle.
Now, Mr. Witkin, when you were told the word Will, W-I-L-L, did you consider that to be an abbreviation for the name William, or did you understand it to be the name of a document, or what was in your mind?
As I understood it, it was 3 first names, 3 proper names and 1 last name.
Like Larry Moe and Curly Joe?
Right, but
Okay.
as Lyle, Eric, and short Lyle, who I knew there existed a human being named Lyle because I was standing there talking to him. Eric, which I assumed was another male first name, and Will, which I assumed was short for William.
Now, you've testified that you found something in the file called Menendez, but it was basically just...
Right, each of the files, what I found was each of the files that I did find had no meaningful information. What they each of them was an exact copy of the other, and what they contained was a listing of the actual directory, as if someone had copied the directory over those files. If you recall, I said when you delete a file, it doesn't actually take the information off, it just changes the name. The one way you can get the information off is write something else right over the top of it.
Now,
So apparently someone had written over the top trying to obscure these 3 files, or either purposefully or accidentally, but someone had actively covered those files with.
All right, now, is one of the things you're asked to do in your profession to go and correct mistakes that people make on their computers?
One of the most common things you do.
All right.
I mean, a major piece. In fact, this tool, Norton Utilities, Peter Norton, who originally created it, managed to build a multi-million-dollar company out of one product, out of an unerased product, a product essentially for just taking when someone else accidentally erases a file and recover it.
All
So
right,
it's a very, very common thing to want to do.
after you located these various files and found that there was no meaningful information inside, did you communicate that back to Lyle Menendez?
Yeah, I did. The first thing I did is once I realized that they had nothing meaningful, the next step that I took, I told them that there was nothing in the files, but there was a tool I could use, again, a piece of Norton Utilities, to search through the whole disk, ignoring files, but just looking at every letter on the disk and trying to find those names to see if they existed someplace else, either in a different file name or if in a file that had been erased and just was still where the raw information was there but no longer attached to a file.
Okay, did you ask him if you should do that, or did you tell him you were going to do that?
I told him I was going to do that.
Okay, now, during the period of time that you were making your search, where was Lyle Menendez?
Coming in and out of the room. When I began, he stood behind me and stood with me. He left the room, came back in several times. A couple of times he was in the room with me, made a phone call and walked back and forth. He was arranging a dinner date or a dinner appointment for that afternoon and arranging a flight back to, or discussing a flight back to New Jersey. But he was with me, watching what I was doing, would leave, come back and watch again what I was doing.
And Mr. Witkin, did you in fact then use the portion of Norton Utilities to search the hard disk to see if you could find any other words or references to the items you've been asked to look
Right,
for?
so I searched the complete hard disk everywhere and found that those files, the words existed no place else on the hard disk except as those 3 file names containing essentially meaningless information. And I told Lyle this, that unfortunately I had failed and was unable to recover any useful or meaningful data for him.
What did he reply to you after you told him that?
What he told me is that was very good, because in fact he didn't want to recover the information. He wanted to make sure that the information was not in fact there and couldn't be recovered even by someone who was actively trying to recover the information.
Now, were you actively trying to recover the information?
It's doing my best.
And about how much time do you think you spent doing that?
20 minutes to half an hour.
All right, after Lyle Menendez told you what you just related to us, what happened then?
I told him I'd been unable to recover it, and then he asked, could I erase it to make sure that even if I hadn't been good enough at recovering it, maybe someone else could. Was there a way I could erase the information to guarantee that it could never be recovered?
Did he tell you why he wanted that done?
He told me that the computer actually contained personal financial information, that they were selling the computer, and the information on the machine was confidential. They did not want it released or anyone else seeing it, which again is a common thing to do. If you have a computer and you want to give it to someone else and you have confidential information, there's a tool for erasing it. Again, part of Norton Utilities.
All right, did you in fact erase the computer at that point?
So I then used, the Norton Utilities has a file called wipe disk, which will go, and I said, the only true way to erase a file is to write something else over it. So what wipe disk does is it goes to the whole hard disk, and every single character, every possible place to put a piece of information, it writes a 1 and then a 0 and then a 1, and it forces it so that there is no way to ever see what was on that disk beforehand.
So Norton Utilities uses a method of doing 1, 0?
What it does is information on a computer is stored as either a 1 or a 0, either an on switch or an off switch. So the way you can erase something is you write something else over it.
Is it common in the field of people who understand computers that if you saw a computer that had 1s and 0s all through it, that you would think the Norton Utilities wipe disk had been used?
You can generally tell when you search. If you go and search if you look at the disk outside of the files, the pieces of the disk that should be random information, because until you write a file, it's random what's out there. So if you looked at the places that should be random and saw that they were all 1s or all 0s, it's clear that someone had been there and used this wipe disk tool.
Now, I believe that when you were explaining your basic course on computers to us, you referred to floppy disks. Is that correct?
Right.
Did you see any floppy disks there when?
Yeah, there was on the desk, there were several other boxes of floppy disks. And in fact, the next question that I was asked was, first I was asked, could you recover? When I said it was impossible to recover, I was asked, can you make sure that it's really impossible to recover? When I did that, the next question that I was asked is, can you make it look as if you were never here? Can you restore the files so that it would not be clear to someone that the disk had been erased?
And who said that to you?
Lyle asked me to do that. He asked me,
Yeah.
could you erase it? Could you make it look as if no one had erased anything on here?
During the period of time that you were working in the bedroom on the computer, aside from Lyle Menendez, did anyone else ever come in the room?
No.
Were you able to make it look like you were never there?
Apparently not perfectly. But what I did is I took the diskettes that contained copies of the original programs that had been on the computer and reloaded those programs, recreated files. So that if you just picked up the computer and looked at the computer, you would see a computer with a series of programs loaded on it and have no reason to suspect that it had ever been formatted or erased or unerased or anything.
So the floppy disks that you saw and used were disks of various programs that one uses in running a computer. Is that
Right.
correct?
They were in fact copies of the programs that had been on the computer before I did the wipe disk. Because once you do the wipe disk, it not only erases files, it erases every program, erases everything off of the hard disk. So I put those programs back on the hard disk.
So for instance, if I had Windows inside of my computer and you did the wipe disk and wiped out the computer, then I'd have to reinstall Windows. Is
Right.
that correct?
Right.
Okay. How long were you there? Do you remember?
Again, about 20 minutes to half an hour.
The entire time?
Yeah, it's not a very lengthy process.
At some point, did you write a receipt for your services, sir?
I did.
Your Honor, I have here an original receipt and also a blow-up copy of it. Would that be marked as, you want me to mark them as 64 and 64 duplicate? Add the original and also a blow-up.
You have one blow up and one original, is that it?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, well, no, make the original 64 and a blow up 65.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I approach, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Witkin, I'm going to show you Exhibit 64 and also the blow-up of it. Is this the actual receipt that you left that day after performing the services you described?
Yes, it is.
And this appears to be a Xerox copy of it. This is just- Now, the receipt indicates the date of the 31st of August of 1989.
Yes, it does.
And was that in fact the date that you were at the home?
Yes, it was.
And do you remember where it was you left the receipt when you left the house that day?
If you look at the picture, just in front of the computer is a television set with like a little VCR on it. I left it on top of that TV and VCR.
Were you paid for your services that day?
Yes, Lyle wrote me a check.
And was that done in your presence?
It was done in my presence. He wrote it to cash in the amount of $150.
Your Honor, I have here a check to cash. This check number 145 may this be marked as People's
66.
66, please. And I also have a blow up of that. May that be marked as 67, please?
Yes.
Mr. Witkin, I'm showing you this check that was now been marked as Exhibit 66, and also a blow up of that check. I'd like to ask you, is this the check you made reference to with which you were paid for your services that day?
Yes, it is.
Now, you seem to have the original of the check. Is there reasons for that?
Yeah, when we deposited the check, it came back from our bank as undepositable with a stamp on it that says refer to maker.
And after it came back to you, did you save it?
We did.
And did you give it to the police sometime?
Yeah, I believe it was the 11th of December when I spoke to the police and gave them my original statement. I also gave them this check.
So on December the 11th of 1989, you had an interview with the police. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at that time, did you identify the check that you've just shown us as Exhibit 66?
Yes, I did.
And did you give them a statement about your activities on August the 31st of 1989?
Yes, I did.
Now, when you spoke to the police, did you review a copy of the police report before testifying today?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. When you spoke to the police, I believe you indicated that Lyle Menendez asked you to look for 3 files, which were Menendez, Eric, and Will.
Right.
And I believe your testimony here and in front of the grand jury was that you were asked about 4 files.
Right.
Okay. What is your best recollection as to what you were asked by Lyle Menendez? Was it 3 or 4 items?
4 files. I apologize. I was a little scared the first time through.
When you say, when were you scared?
When I spoke to the police and also when I
How about, were you nervous in front of the grand jury?
definitely nervous in front of the grand jury.
Right.
Also nervous now. But
All right. Well, one final question. Does your business Leviathan Development advertise in the Yellow Pages?
yes, it does.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further to this witness at this time.
All right, cross-examination. How long do you think your examination would be?
I think it will be at least 15, possibly 20 minutes.
Okay, then we'll have to do it at 1:30 then, ladies and gentlemen. We'll excuse you until 1:30. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any opinions about it, and we'll see you back here at 1:30. You all return also. Jury is in the jury box, and we'll resume with the examination of Mr. Witkin. If you would take the witness stand again, please. All right, cross-examination.
Mr. Witkin, this is about 1:30 in the afternoon when you received this call on August 31st. Is that
Yes,
right?
sir.
And I think you told us that you actually had a telephone call with Lyle Menendez before you arrived at the house. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And what was the telephone conversation you had with him at that time?
Roughly along the lines of, hello, this is Howard Witkin. I'm with Leviathan Development. You called my office for a service call. Do you still need that? Exactly where do you need me to go? And I should be there in a few minutes. I'm just a few blocks from you.
All right. And at that time, Lyle Menendez told you that he wanted you to retrieve some information from his computer,
Yes, sir.
and he wanted you to do it immediately. Isn't that what he told you?
Yes, sir.
He didn't use the words desperately as you testified in cross-examination, did he?
Word for word, I don't recall. It's been 4 years, but my general impression was It was an emergency. It needed to happen then that day. That we had a couple of hours before he was leaving Los Angeles. But I'm sure the word desperate wasn't spoken. And I don't remember the exact word for word conversation.
By the way, you reviewed, I think you said, your grand jury testimony before you testified here today, right?
Yes, sir.
And you reviewed a police report that contained an interview that you had with the Beverly Hills Police Department in December of 1989?
Yes, sir.
And did you remember when you were reading the part of your grand jury testimony that at one point during the grand jury proceedings you were asked what you did for a living, and your answer was at page 84, "We are an emergency response troubleshooting firm, so people would call us with any computer-related problems. Unfortunately, one of the most common is, quote, I have erased something, I have lost it, help, I desperately need this," end quote. Do you remember giving that testimony?
Something to that effect,
Right,
yes,
so
sir.
that's probably where this word desperately came from. You were describing in general the state of people that call you up and desperately want you to come over and retrieve something from a computer.
Possibly, yes.
Right, now, after you had the telephone conversation, or even before it, I think your impression was that the name of the person you were dealing with was Lyle Menendez,
Right,
correct?
as I actually wrote it down on my little notes that I was keeping, I wrote it down as Mendez.
And was that a mistake you made, your office made, or did Lyle Menendez say, my name is Lyle Mendez?
I sincerely doubt that he gave the name incorrectly. I'm pretty positive that either I heard it incorrectly or my dispatcher heard it incorrectly.
And in any event, when you arrived at the house, somebody there informed you that the correct name of the person you were dealing with was Lyle Menendez, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then you had a conversation with Lyle in which he introduced himself as Lyle Menendez.
I believe he introduced himself just as Lyle.
And at that point, you knew his name was Menendez because the security guard had said the true name is Lyle Menendez.
Yeah, I think that the time that I was absolutely certain what the last name was at the very end when I had a check that said Menendez. So when I actually looked and, when I went and took the check with me, then I was sure it was Menendez. At what point I realized that I had the name incorrect, I can't recall. Whether it was exactly at the beginning or some point
Sure.
in a later conversation.
At any point in time when you were dealing with Lyle Menendez that day, did he ever say to you, this is a confidential, words to the effect of, this is a confidential matter and I don't want you disclosing that you and I had this conversation?
No, the only thing that he stated to me that was confidential was the information on the system.
As the reason why
As
you
the
would
reason
like,
why he wanted the information eliminated.
and when you say the information, you mean everything that was on there that you had retrieved, correct?
Yes, sir.
In other words, he never said to you, I just want the information relating to the word will, or the other words I think you said were Lyle, Eric, and Menendez, correct?
No, the times at which there was a specific reference to specific files or specific information was at the point when I was asked, can you find this information? When we got to the point of, can you eliminate, it's this, and the information on this computer is confidential. We're getting rid of the computer. Please make sure that that confidential information is eliminated.
And that made perfect sense to you in terms of what you do for a living.
Absolutely.
What people ask you to do.
Absolutely.
Could you tell whether that computer had been wiped before you got there?
It had not been wiped, meaning no one had used something like wipe file that eliminates everything on the disk. But the 3 files that I was looking for, the information that they had, the 3 files or 4 files that I was looking for, the information that they possessed, which was essentially a directory listing, would have been very difficult. It's not reasonable that I would have found exact same copies of the same information in all 4 of those files that was time-stamped, 1 minute apart, unless someone had consciously copied that information over those files. So the whole disk had not been consciously erased, but it was my impression that someone, whether purposefully or accidentally, had made a conscious effort and copied information over those files.
How old was that computer?
Probably 4 years, 5 years. I mean, it was an XT, so at that point it was already an old style. It was already an outdated technology.
And just in general, how easy was it for someone unskilled in operating that computer to learn how to use that as compared maybe to some simpler computers?
From what I recall, the programs that he had loaded were very simple and very basic programs. So, I mean, I could teach my mom to use it in probably an hour.
All right.
maybe a little longer.
And did Lyle Menendez ever say that he knew how to operate the computer?
No, sir.
Did he ever say that he had attempted to retrieve the information off the computer?
I don't recall.
Now, as I understand it, you started looking through the system, and at one point you identified, I think you said 4 words, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the 4 words were Will, Eric, Menendez,
And
and
Lyle.
Lyle.
Yes, sir.
And then from seeing those words, you then did a directory search and came up with a list under Menendez?
I came up with a list that included several of those file names, including Menendez. As you do a list, you see files, command files, you see all of the different program files within the system.
All right, and I have 3 computer programs which I've had marked as Exhibit 68, 69, and 70. 68 is actually a printout, isn't it?
Yes.
Can you pick up that and tell me if you can identify that?
Yeah, push to push on.
Yes.
What would you like to know about it?
Well, hold on a
First of all,
second.
tell the jury.
Wait. Have you seen this? And
I've seen it, but I don't know which one's which.
This is a computer printout, correct?
Yes, it is.
And at the top of the printout, it shows the words C/print Menendez, correct?
Yes.
And just looking down the program here, or the printout, can you tell what's being done by the person who's operating?
Yeah, whoever is attempting to use this, the first, if you notice, as it's printing each line, it's printing the DOS print. It's printing everything as it would appear on the screen. Generally, when you type on a computer, it doesn't print out each thing that displays on the screen. The one way to get it to do that is there's a key that says print screen that you can hit and then force it to print everything as you do. What it looks like is it is someone who doesn't understand how the machine works, making their best effort to try to print these files. So the first thing is they probably hit the print screen, which didn't work, which then put it in print mode, and then they're trying to print file after file.
And
But
does
so
it
it's-
indicate the files that are sought to be printed are, first of all, Menendez?
Yeah, this doesn't imply anything about what's actually there, but it says someone's trying to print a file called Menendez, but the syntax is wrong. The way they're doing it is incorrect. They have some knowledge because they're actually using real DOS commands. They're just using them improperly. Another print command, another find command looking for Menendez, another one looking for something called Will, something trying to find Will.
Again, all
It's
improper commands.
all improperly executed, but it's close.
And is that basically what you were doing when you were there that
No,
day,
sir.
in terms of calling up the words Menendez and Will after you found those listed in the directory?
Similar, but with the commands done correctly.
Right. And looking at exhibit number 69, I wonder if you could tell us what that is.
This looks like an actual directory listing.
And that's a directory listing that you would obtain, at least on that computer, if you gave it a command to search. under Menendez?
I couldn't say what computer this came from. This is not a document I've ever seen before, so I'm not sure
I
where
understand
this.
On whatever computer that was printed on.
Yeah, this is someone asking for a list of all files that are in what's called the root directory, the very lowest level list, the most basic list on the computer.
we have to clarify that this is or is not what you saw when you did your computer search.
To tell you the truth, I have no idea whether this is from that computer or not. It could be to reproduce this would be very simple from pretty much any computer
Any computer that had those files.
that did have these specific files.
And that printout was made using the,
This looks like it was just made by doing a dir, but someone who had already done a control print screen.
and what is this line meaning? Volume and drive C is, and then in capital letters, Menendez.
You have the ability on any PC to type in a command called label, which will allow you to assign that PC a name. It's not a permanent name. So if there's any PC in the room, I can take in a second and just say label Menendez and then do a directory and then say label Witkin, and the label would be gone. So this is whoever printed this directory at some point typed out label Menendez. Either if this is the machine that was in that room, then that could be that, or it could be from a machine in your office as a recreation, or
And
be
how
from
about
anywhere.
Exhibit 70? Could you describe what that purports to be?
It looks like a directory listing of a subdirectory called, no, it looks to be a subdirectory listing, but if you look again, the command, what appears to be the command that's creating it is not a command that could create it. So this is a printout from some sort of file, but it's a list of half a dozen files, including one called Will, one called Menendez, and one called List. I mean, this strikes me as similar. When I had said before that each of the three files contained garbage, contained no meaningful information, this is similar to what would have been in each of those files. This is similar to what I saw, where what the file contained was actually a 4 or 5 file listing of a directory.
All right, and that is Exhibit 70 is similar to what you would have seen.
Similar. I couldn't identify if that's exactly the file. And again, I'm not sure what this is from, and it's what this printout came from or where.
Now, under the word will in Exhibit number 70, there is a number which says 59, and then next to that number there is what appears to be a date, 1/13/87, and what appears to be a time, maybe 4:58 Could you explain to the jury what that information means?
Yeah, the way an XT computer works, these are the early computer, is it has the ability to track a time and a date. But as a general rule, it tracks that time and date from whatever time you turn it on, starting with February 1st, 1980, 12 a.m. So if I took an XT right now, turned it off and turned it on, and asked it what time it was, it would tell me it's 12 a.m., February 1st, 1980. And they all start from there. The way you get a different date is you type the word date, hit return, and it'll ask you, what date do you want me to think it is? And you tell it what date you want, and then you tell it what time you want, and then it will hold that date and time. Newer computers, the AT and after that, have a battery. So you create the time when you set up the computer originally, and then generally it keeps track of the time from that date on a going forward basis.
And can you tell from looking at that printout when the file will was created, at least the one on that printout?
It purports to have been created the 13th of January, 1987, but there's no way to know that for sure. Because basically you can take and create this file. I mean, I can create and time and date stamp it any day or any time. Because this machine, when you turn it on, you have to type in the date and the time to it. There's no way really to know whether this is an accurate or an inaccurate date stamp. As a general rule, time and date stamps on XTs are not considered to be reliable. On an AT or a 386 or a 486, where it has an ongoing clock calendar that it tracks, you can generally consider those to be reliable.
And how about the number 59? What is that in reference to that file called will?
What that tracks is the number of bytes, the number of letters in the file. If perchance this were an actual directory or the actual content of those files, what you note on it, this is similar to what I recall, is that all three files were the same exact size, which this shows 59. They were all, fairly trivial size. They all contained the exact same contents, which was a 4 or 5 file name listing. But also, if you notice on this, regardless of the date, they're time stamped 1 minute after the other. Which means if it had happened accidentally, if the machine, like the hard disk, had crashed and miscopied files or mislinked a file, you would not find each of the files to be the same size and time-stamped 1 minute after the other, which kind of implies that whoever created these files, whoever wrote over these files, did it in a purposeful fashion, that they went one after the other and copied, if I typed dir space, a greater than sign, and the word will, I would take exactly this data and stamp it right over whatever had been in the file will. But then type dir space greater than sign Eric, I do the same thing to Eric. Same thing to Menendez. So what it appears is however this file was created, is it was written one after the other over each of the 3 files.
And just looking at that printout, can you tell how much information, and by how much, I mean how many words, are in that file called will, just looking at the printout?
59 letters, so nothing substantial. I mean, 59 letters, you figure 8 letters a word, so you're looking at 8, 10, 8 words, 10 words.
So in terms of a will, have you seen
It's-
many wills with
No,
59 letters in it?
no. I mean, definitely if the file itself were a will, it was no longer on that machine when I sat down to look at it.
By the way, in your business, have you been called upon to call up a lot of wills on computers?
Not that I ever recall.
Have you ever heard of a will on a computer?
Absolutely.
You have.
Yeah. I haven't played with it, but in fact, it's no longer, but what used to be one of the best-selling personal programs was a program that I believe was called Willmaker, which was designed specifically to allow a person to create a will on his own. You take it home, and there's numerous little programs that are designed to let you create documents. If you don't want to take it outside, or you don't want to bear the expense, it will piece the documents together for you. So actually, for personal use, for home use, a Willmaker was a pretty common piece of software. Or in fact, if you wanted to just take it in a word processor and just type it up, if you want to be able to leave a record, it's a simple place to do it.
Now, I think you said as you were trying to retrieve this information that Lyle Menendez was leaving your area where this computer wasn't going other places?
Unless you mean during the course of the time that I was there, he came
Right.
in and out of the room several times. He was
And,
with me for the first couple of minutes, went away downstairs, came back again, went downstairs, came back again.
and I realize it's been 4 years, but do you remember a conversation you had with him about saving any information on the computer, be it will or anything else?
I'm not sure what you mean by to save it. I mean, the original conversation is, can you recover it?
In other words, was there a request that a printout be made?
Not that I recall.
It could have been you simply don't recall.
It could be that I simply don't recall.
Now,
I know that none of these, like I could be pretty positive that none of these printouts, possibly with the exception of the one that contains the file content, were while I was there.
and the one you just picked up is what, Exhibit 7?
That is Exhibit 70. But I know 68 isn't, only because I know how those commands work. So I know that that wasn't my work because I know how those commands work. The other I don't recognize and don't believe it was actually a printout from before I touched it, only because these other subdirectories, for example, the one with the wills in it, don't appear in this listing. So these two are not consistent, as if they didn't come from the same machine at the same time.
But 70 may have.
70 is
been there.
possible that this may have been a printout of the contents of that file. I don't recall having printed it, but there's certainly the possibility that I did so.
Now, in terms of what happened after you told Lyle Menendez that you couldn't retrieve any of the information, he said to you at that point that that was good because what he really would like to do is, since they were selling the computer, he wanted to have all the information on the machine erased. Isn't that one of the things he said?
He wanted to, not necessarily all of the information, meaning like I'm sure he wouldn't mind if the programs themselves had, but apparently what he asked is there was information on the machine that was confidential, private, personal, financial information that he did not want in anyone else's hands, and could I make sure that that information would not be recoverable? The best way that I know how to do that is to make sure that nothing exists on the disk. And if you want to make sure that if you're an investor and you want to make sure that your investment information or certain inside trader information or confidential information is gone, what you want to do is erase it all.
And you then use this Norton wipe
disk
disk
and
to
wiped it clean.
wipe it out.
Yes, sir.
And in terms of someone coming in behind you, a competent computer expert, would that expert be able to tell immediately, or at least after a couple of minutes of examination, whether the wipe disk had been used?
Depending on what he looked, if he suspected, like if I suspected someone had used wipe disk before I was there, then I could have discovered that.
How do you discover that?
I would have looked at a sector of the disk that did not contain any files and looked to see whether it was random ones and zeros, or whether it was all ones or all zeros, and just kind of look or see if there were bits of data. For example, if I create a file and erase it and create it and erase different files, it'll leave scattered bits of data. So you can look in the areas that aren't files and just see what's out there and see whether it's clean. If it's clean, then someone's erased it. If it's got random scattered data, then it's just the natural, nothing's been written there yet. If I didn't know to look for it, I wouldn't have looked in the non-file areas. So it's only if the person suspected that someone had done so and was consciously looking for it that they would have noticed it.
Now, when you got done with this transaction, you then told them that it was going to cost them $150 for your
Yes, sir.
services.
Yes, sir.
And you wrote out a receipt with your name on it, correct? Your company name and also your personal name?
Yeah, we have standard service authorizations that we use. It was Exhibit 64, I guess, where we use a standard document in which we can write what we did. So anyone that we work for, they can go back and later and refer, see what work we had performed for them. So I wrote out a receipt of who I was, who the work was done for, and what was done.
And do you keep a copy of that bill that you give to him?
Yeah, there's a copy that we leave with the customer, a copy that comes back to the customer with the mailed invoice, a copy that we keep, the original sign sheet that we keep in our files, and then one other copy that we keep in a numerical sequence filed away.
And did Lyle Menendez ever indicate to you that he would not like any paperwork created on this transaction and that he'd give you a little bit extra money if you didn't do that?
No, sir.
And do you recall him saying, I'd rather pay in cash, or that there wasn't any record of this transaction?
I recall him writing the check to cash, but I don't recall any offer to actually pay in cash. But he wrote the check to me as a check written to cash.
Do you remember why that was done?
I don't believe he was explicit.
All right. And the check itself had the name Menendez right on it, correct?
Yes, sir.
With the address?
Yes, sir. Different address.
Different address. And you took that check back to your office and tried to cash it, and the bank sent it back.
I took it back, turned it over to my controller, who put it in our deposit, and the bank sent it back.
And did that kind of bring the transaction back to mind and alert you to the fact that there was some sort of problem?
When the check came back from the bank, stamped refer to maker, and I saw the next day an article in the newspaper related to the case, I realized it wasn't a real pleasant thing.
All right. And
at that point, I called the police and anonymously said, "I don't know who this is, but here's what happened and here's what I know."
And in terms of hiding the transaction, probably not a real good thing to do to give you a bounced check, was it?
Sustained.
Did you see the article in the paper on December 5th, 1989?
Yes, sir, I did.
And that was an article in the Los Angeles Times indicating that the police were starting to investigate the possibility that a will had been erased?
Yes, sir. And that was the first time I realized that the word will might not have been a first name.
Right. And did you have the check between August 31st and December 5th? In other words, up to that point, you had no idea the connection of this transaction with what you saw reported in the newspapers.
I knew there was something about it, so I kept pulled everything into a separate file and turned it over to my lawyer and told him, keep this. Someday we may need to do.
In other words, even before that day, even before
when
December
the check came
5th,
back refer to maker, I realized there was something. I realized there was a murder case. I realized that I had been in the house, and I turned it over to my lawyer. It wasn't. When I was in the house the original day, something about the transaction, and especially when we got to the point of make sure it looked like you hadn't been here, made my spine crawl. So I knew there was something. I strongly felt, at least subconsciously, there was something very unusual and very wrong.
let me ask you this. When you went to the house, did you know it was the house where the killings had taken place?
I had no awareness of the killings. I generally don't read the murder news.
And when was it that you decided to give the check to your attorney to hang on for later use?
After the check came back, refer to maker, a week later, 10 days later, when I saw an article and realized that this case existed, is when I gave it to him to hold. So it was probably the 15th of September.
And then on December 5th, you made an anonymous phone call to the Beverly Hills Police Department indicating that you had some information about the computer that they were
Yes, sir.
investigating at that point, correct?
Yes, sir. When I read the article in the Times and realized that it was something of significance related to the case, I called the police.
And at that point, you didn't want to reveal your identity because basically you were fearful of being involved in something as serious as this, correct?
Absolutely.
And the way that the police got to you, well, let me ask you, do you know how the police got your name finally, if you didn't come forward?
Well, my first question to them when I called them on the 5th. They called and told them a little bit of what I knew. They called me on the 6th. My initial speculation was, maybe they had traced the call. What I was told is that, in fact, they had served a search warrant on the house, found the receipt, which had my name, our company's address and phone number. They contacted me the next morning and asked if I'd come talk to them.
And they told you that that receipt with your name on it was in the exact location where you had left it back on August 31st, 1989, didn't they?
They told me that it was found in the house, and it was found with the computer. They didn't tell me where they had found it. They didn't tell me where in the room they had found the receipt, but they told me that they had found the receipt with the computer.
Still in the house where you had been
Still in
back
the house where I
August.
had been.
That's all I had, thank you.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. May I approach, please?
Yes.
Mr. Witkin, I'm not going to go over these in great detail, but these three exhibits that the defense attorney marked, number 68, 69, and 70, which appear to be on regular computer paper, right? Now, these three exhibits, I had this kind of paper and I had an IBM computer at home. Could I go home tonight and make an exhibit like this?
If you have half an hour, 10 minutes.
Right, so in other words, I think what you told us during your testimony was that a computer doesn't know what time it is unless you tell it. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And even though my computer might think that today is August the 2nd, 1993, I could go home tonight and tell it that it's really March the 2nd, 1972 if I wanted to, right?
2 commands, 10 seconds maybe.
All right, so, and then with that, I could recreate a directory.
You can rename it Menendez in another couple of seconds and type a directory and
Now,
have these printouts.
I just have a couple more questions. When I create a file in my computer, the computer, if it has the date and time correct, will indicate next to the file the date and time that that file was created. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Then if I go back into the file and I change the file, and I tell the computer that I want to save the changes, does the computer put the new date and time of when the changes were done?
Yes.
All right, so in other words, I believe in Exhibit 70, there's something about will and something about, just a moment. There's a date and this date appears to be January 13th, 1987.
Right.
With the time. But that doesn't mean that's when the file was created. That means that's when it was last accessed and changed.
That would be when it was last changed, last written over.
And I believe you indicated that there, according to Exhibit 70, that file created contained 59 bytes. Is that correct?
Yes.
And byte is computer terminology for
One letter.
One letter. All right. If in fact the file was changed and previously it had contained 20,000 bytes and it had been changed to just 59 bytes, would the fact that there previously had been 20,000 bytes be reflected once you changed it to 59?
No.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
No, Your Honor.
Just to clarify, you referred to timestamps on the 4 files that you saw on your computer.
Yes.
Looked at the computer screen, is that right?
Yes.
Do you recall what the timestamps were, what the dates
sir.
were?
No, sir, I do not.
You have
Sorry.
no recollection whatsoever?
Because on an XT, time and date stamps are so meaningless, you never look at them, never refer to them. If you look at most XTs, probably half the files are dated 1980, only because most people don't change the time and date.
Okay, all right. Anything else?
They're basically meaningless.
Okay, thank you. You may step down. All right, let me see counsel at the sidebar, please. All right, there is a matter that I want to discuss with counsel. It'll take a few minutes, and if it looks like it'll take longer, we'll let you know. But I'd ask that you go into the jury room, not discuss this case with anyone, don't form any opinions about it. And as soon as we're ready either to continue or if we need a longer recess, I'll send bailiff in there and let you know that so we can get you out of there. All right, the jury has left the courtroom, and we can have counsel out, or counsel here, and the defendant, Eric Menendez, out, and we'll discuss the matter relating to him. The defendant, Eric Menendez, is in court as well. And in regards to Mr. Witkin's testimony, as it relates to Eric Menendez, what is the position of the parties?
I would like to present to Eric Menendez's jury the simple fact that Mr. Witkin was there at the Menendez home on August 31st, 1989, and at the request of Lyle Menendez, used the Norton wipe to erase the computer as it related to the items that he was looking for, whether it was Menendez, Will, Eric, and Lyle. I would not propose to have before Eric Menendez's jury the fact that Lyle had written a check that bounced. So it would be brief testimony regarding the simple fact that there was in fact a computer expert who was there the day before Mr. Hyman arrived, and in fact used this Norton wipe on the computer.
And what is the response? Well, first of all, why did you want to show that to the jury?
Well, there's a number of reasons. As I've indicated, Mr. Signorelli had testified that Eric Menendez knew on September 1st, 1989, that his brother had a professional come and erase the will. In addition to that, there was testimony and cross-examination that Eric Menendez, in talking to Carlos Menendez over the phone, as related to by Mr. Hyman, that Eric Menendez disavowed any knowledge of that, telling his relative Carlos Menendez that he didn't have anything to do with it, he didn't know anything about it. So this impeaches that statement by Eric Menendez that he made on the phone.
Anything else?
No.
All right, and what is the position of the defense?
Your Honor, the fact that Eric told Craig Signorelli that his brother had someone come in and erase it the day before does not mean that Eric was involved or responsible for or joined in his brother's actions the day before. So that I think the prosecution is trying to impute prior knowledge to Eric when they in fact have no evidence that Eric had any prior knowledge of this plan on the part of Lyle to have Mr. Witkin come in and erase the computer. As far as the argument that it is admissible because of Eric's talk to Carlos on September 1st in the kitchen, Eric merely said he had nothing to do with it. And that, in fact, appears to be the case. Mr. Witkin never saw him there, cannot testify that Eric was there, his name was ever mentioned, and he appears to have had nothing to do with it. The problem with admitting Witkin's testimony before Eric's jury is it invites the jury to speculate about Eric's involvement in the getting the computer into the state it was at the time Witkin arrived, and in then asking Witkin to perform various functions with the computer. So I think that it is for that reason that the jury should not be permitted to hear Mr. Witkin's testimony because it will certainly invite unfair speculation as to Eric's involvement.
Well, as the record stands now, we have Signorelli's testimony relating to the defendant Eric Menendez's state of mind as to interest in wills and interest in what was on the computer, which is circumstantial evidence of his state of mind at the time he made these statements and also at the time of the homicides in this case, which was in close time proximity to that. And my recollection of the testimony of Mr. Signorelli was that Eric Menendez told Mr. Signorelli that his brother had someone erase a will, and that there was reference further to a will that was on the computer that had left everything to the two sons, and that the father was in the process of reworking that will or writing a new will.
Your Honor, I think that's, excuse me for interrupting you, but I think that's the opposite of what Signorelli said. He said there was an old will that left everything to the sons, and there was a new will on the computer that would have partially disinherited.
Yeah, well, that there was a new will, I haven't finished yet, that the new will was either a reworking of the old will or something new that would have left some money to the son, some money to a company, and some money to someone else. And the evidence before Eric Menendez's jury is basically that that will was erased, or that Eric Menendez told Mr. Signorelli that that will was erased by or at the direction of Lyle Menendez. And the evidence of Mr. Witkin is that didn't happen, that something else happened, that there was no erasure. So my question of the defense is, what is your objection?
Well, part of it we wouldn't object to, part of it we do. The part about Lyle saying he wants to cover his tracks and Lyle talking about erase everything, we don't think that's relevant for our jury at all, because it doesn't bear on Eric's state of mind. But I wouldn't mind having Mr. Witkin testify to what appears to have been the state all along, which is that when he turned on that computer, what he saw was similar to what's in Exhibit 70, which was files that did not in any way, shape, or form contain a will, at least at the point when he saw it. So I don't really have any objection to his testifying in that limited way, but we would object to Lyle's conversation with him. We would object to the inference that Lyle is trying to hide something or do something sneaky from those conversations, because we don't think they bear on Eric's state of mind at all.
Was it that which you wanted to offer or not? I don't. My recollection of your offer of proof was that you didn't want to go into the conversations that took place between Lyle Menendez and Mr. Witkin, other than that Mr. Witkin was there and did certain things.
He was asked to find entries under Menendez, Will, Eric, and Lyle, and that he erased, using the Norton White on the computer, erased any entries that would have been under those names.
And that he was there because Lyle Menendez asked him to be there.
Yes.
Right. Is there any objection to that evidence coming in?
Well, I'm assuming that Mr. Curiano means he's not being explicit, but he's saying that he would not elicit that Lyle asked him to do the erasure or that Lyle asked him to cover his tracks. Is that what am I correct in making an assumption?
The question is are you going to try to bring that out?
I think that, yes, I think that's relevant. He was requested by Lyle in particular to erase these items.
Okay, and why is that relevant? Again, we're talking about your offer of proof related to the state of mind of Eric Menendez.
With respect to, well, it's not only with respect to his state of mind, but also his statement that he knew nothing about what his brother had done when he spoke to Carlos Menendez on the 1st of September. When on that day he had told Craig Signorelli that his brother had in fact had a computer expert come and erase the computer.
All right, but how does that relate back to these statements attributed to Lyle Menendez that have been objected to here regarding
It corroborates
secretive efforts or efforts to conceal and the reaction that Mr. Witkin had to it, his reaction being there and what was going on.
and it corroborates what Mr. Signorelli testified to. That is that in fact, if we could put this evidence on, in fact, an expert was there the day before and actually did that which Mr. Signorelli testified Eric Menendez told him his brother had done.
Well, the defense says they have no objection to that, but the specifics of what you're talking about, they have no objection to that. The additional evidence that you're offering relating to statements attributed to Lyle Menendez is what is being objected to. Why is that relevant to the state of mind of Eric Menendez? What does that prove or disprove as far as whether Mr. Witkin was there and what he did?
I suppose a statement by Lyle without the presence of Eric Menendez wouldn't necessarily go to Eric Menendez's state of mind. So if the court wishes me to simply ask about the fact of erasure, that's acceptable.
All right, well, it's basically what relevance it has, and you apparently are conceding it has no relevance going beyond that. So what you're saying?
I'm not conceding that, but I understand the court's position.
All right, so why don't you articulate exactly what it is you would propose to ask Mr. Witkin?
I'm going to conduct, Director.
Okay.
I should probably phrase it, that on August the 31st, 1989, Mr. Witkin went to the Menendez home at 722 North Elm, that Lyle Menendez was there, that Mr. Witkin went into a room, accessed the family's computer, and looked for 4 items, that he could not find any useful information under those 4 items, and that he erased the computer using Norton's utilities.
And I would ask counsel just to make the evidence coherent for the jury to also elicit that he then reloaded the operating programs. Otherwise, Mr. Hayman's testimony makes no sense. That he reloaded the operating programs back into the computer, which of course we all learned today.
All right, anything else?
I would ask that the people not be permitted to elicit, and then Mr. Witkin be advised not to volunteer his fears, concerns, anonymous phone calls to police, all that hearsay speculation.
All right, well, that has not been the people's offer, so it's clear that they're not going to be asking those things.
Lastly, may I be permitted to show this jury the receipt so that later on they can understand how the police came to find Mr. Witkin?
We would object, Your Honor. I think it's important that the jury know how we came to find him. We're not challenging that he was there.
All right, I agree. I don't think this has any great probative value, as long as there's no dispute that he was there on that particular date. If there is any dispute as far as how he fixes the date, then obviously the receipt has some relevance. All right, as far as this evidence, it wouldn't take very long, and then after that, counsel indicated that they have a brief matter they want to deal with in a closed session, which would take about 10 minutes. And then we would be resuming with the testimony of the medical examiner before both juries after a hearing dealing with photographs. Is that right?
No, Your Honor, there's a witness, Ms. Mahar, who's the lady who worked at Slavic Jewelers.
Okay.
This is her second day here waiting.
All right.
for us.
Okay, then we'll do that before we take the break, and that would be before both juries. Is that right?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, what we're going to do then is take a short recess and have the Eric Menendez jury come into the courtroom, and they will occupy the center section. And those people in the center section will have to vacate that. And then we'll proceed with the testimony of Mr. Witkin before the Eric Menendez jury, and then we'll have the Lyle Menendez jury come in, and both juries will hear the testimony of Mrs. Mahar. Right, and for the benefit of the television operator here, the testimony of Ms. Mahar will be subject to the court's order that it not be broadcast or recorded, that it only be transmitted to the media room and not be recorded or transmitted out of the media room. Yes, we'll be in a short recess until we get the jury and clear up this center section. Right, in the trial, the defendant Eric Menendez is in court with his lawyers. The people are represented, and the jury for Eric Menendez is also in court, and will resume at this time with testimony regarding the defendant Eric Menendez. You may proceed.
People call Mr. Howard Witkin to the stand.
You do solemnly affirm that the testimony you may give in the court now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. This you do under the king and the perjury. Proceed, please, and state your name for the record.
My name is Howard Witkin, Witkin.
All right, you may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Witkin, what do you do for a living, please?
I'm a computer consultant. I have a computer service business. We provide emergency response service for people's computer systems.
And what kind of services do you provide to people?
We do hardware and software repair. We do disaster recovery, sales, installation, network design, software development, pretty much anything necessary to help people take care of their personal computer systems.
On August the 31st of 1989, did you go to a home located at 722 North Elm Drive at about 1:30 in the afternoon?
Yes, ma'am.
When you went to that location, did you meet with a man who became known to you as Lyle Menendez.
Yes, ma'am.
Did Lyle Menendez ask you to look for 4 specific things inside of the family computer?
Yes, ma'am.
What are the 4 things he asked you to look for?
He asked me to look for 4 files, specifically Lyle, a file named Lyle, one named Eric, one named Will, and one named Menendez.
Where was the computer physically located within the house?
In an upstairs bedroom immediately to the right when you walked in the doors.
Your Honor, I believe the witness has in front of him Exhibit 63. I have another one here put on this board. It's quite small, but Mr. Witkin, briefly, could you tell us what is depicted in the far corner of this picture?
This picture shows the bedroom into which I went, and it shows the computer in the far corner in the center of this picture. This is the computer that I went to work on.
At some point, did you erase that computer?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And did you use a particular program to erase the computer?
Yes, ma'am, I used a program called Norton Wipe Disk.
And is that part of the Norton utilities?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And could you just briefly tell us what does the wipe disk do to the computer?
What the wipe disk does is it takes the whole hard disk, the main storage place in the computer, and it writes over every single piece of information in it with either a 1 or a 0, and it erases it in such a way that it cannot be recovered.
At the completion of wiping or deleting everything on this computer, did you do something to reload programs onto the computer?
Yes, I took a series of floppy diskettes that they had. In fact, if you look in the picture, you can see them underneath the computer, and reloaded all of the original programs without any of the data files onto that computer.
So you had the generic program, but not any specific things that a user would have put into that.
Right. For example, if you had a word processor, I would have put back the word processor, but none of the documents or letters or paperwork that you had personally created, just those files that you would have purchased from the store.
Now, was anyone else there with you while you were doing this aside from Lyle Menendez inside of the home?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. I have no further questions of this witness.
Cross-examination.
Mr. Witkin, if you stand a little back from the mic, it won't keep popping the way it's popping. Okay. Did you turn on this computer and make an effort to locate the 4 named files that Lyle had asked you to look for?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And do you recall whether you ever saw on the screen of that computer any files bearing the names that he had given you?
Yes, ma'am, I did find files on the computer which did have those file names.
Okay. Did you find a directory on the computer under the name Menendez?
Yes, ma'am, I believe I did.
Did you also find a file on the computer with the name Menendez?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you find a file on the computer with the name Will?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, would you explain to this jury what is a file in the sense that we use it when we talk about a computer?
If I could look, I can remember how I explained it an hour ago. Now,
Well,
a file is when you create anything on a computer, when you want to create a document. So you want to type a letter on your computer. So you sit down at the keyboard and you pull up a program and you type the letters and then you give it a name. And you say, I want to save this letter or this memo or this spreadsheet or whatever it is that you're working with. I want to save it. I want you to keep it for me so I can pull it up at a later time, and you give it a name. And it stores that name, it stores that file, which is the series of information on the computer disk, and then it stores a reference to that information in something called a directory. The directory is like an index. It's a list of names. Each name refers to a specific file, a specific document, and it tells the computer where to look on the hard disk to find that document when you next want to work with it.
Okay, so a file is not really a category. It's actually a particular document that you
Exactly.
And if you created, let's say, the letter that you have described, you could name that letter 1 if you want.
You can name it anything that you would like to.
And if you then proceeded to create 15 more separate letters, you could give them each a number, and you'd have a series of files called letter 1 through 15.
Absolutely.
Okay. And the thing that you saw on this computer well, strike that. Now, that would be the thing itself, the file itself would be each of these letters, 1 through 15.
Right.
And each time you create a document like this, create a file, the computer itself keeps track of all the things you've created in something called a directory.
Perfect.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And you can give directories different names too.
Right. If you were creating 1,000 letters, it becomes very difficult to ever find those again. Every time you wanted to find a letter, you'd have to look down this list of 1,000. So what it gives you the ability is you can create sub-lists. So you can make a list called business correspondence and a list called recipes and a list called personal correspondence and start to break it up into subcategories.
So you take that 1,000 letters, and if 300 were business correspondence, they'd show up under a subdirectory called
Right.
business correspondence.
Right. And then you may divide that up even farther, and you want to try to break it down enough that it's easy to discover where you've put a specific document if you want to find it again.
That's because if you want to start up with a computer and search for a particular document, you can tell it, look under letters, look under business correspondence, look under Joe Jones, and then it will bring up all in one shot all the Joe Jones letters in there.
Right.
Okay. That's known as a path, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, when you saw on this computer a file or document called will, is there something that you have to do when you see a file name on a computer to actually look at what the document says?
Yes, there is. If you're just in DOS, the basic operating system that tells a computer how to be a computer, the only thing that you'll really see is the list, is the index. If you actually want to see the contents, depending on how that was created, if it was created in some word processors, I have to either run the word processor itself because it puts special codes. It doesn't print it as normal letters. It puts it in a coded format. So some programs you have to run the actual program itself to see it. Some of them, if it's mostly text, if it's mostly just the letters, A, B, C, D, you can copy it to the screen. You can copy it to a printer. But you do have, it's a different command to see the reference to the document than it is to actually see the text or the body of the document itself.
Okay, DOS, the basic operating system for the computer. If you turn on a computer and you're in that operating system and you want to know the names of all the files or a list of all the files, you basically only have to type in dir for directory.
Right.
And it will then print up on the screen the name of every single file that's been created.
Within that directory, if you wanted to go into one of those subdirectories as we spoke, you would need to be explicit. Instead of saying dir, you'd say dir space Menendez, and it would show you all of the files that were within the subdirectory called Menendez.
But let's assume you don't know there are subdirectories.
Then you would just sit down and type dir, and it would tell you what's there.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Why don't you wait for the question? If you go to a computer you've never looked at before, and you're in DOS, and you type dir, directory, it will then bring up a list of all of the other directories, the subdirectories, and all of the files that are just loose files. They're not inside another directory.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, let's say you don't go through the word processing program. Let's say you want to actually see the text of a particular file that's appeared on this list. What do? You're in DOS. Can you bring up text in DOS?
You can.
And what do you do to do that?
I would use a command called copy. I would do copy space and then the file name. Say the file name was called letter. If I wanted to see it on the screen, I would type COPY space LETTER space CON and a colon, which says copy the contents of the file letter to my console, which is my screen.
Which
it
means,
would display it it would take and display it on the screen.
Okay, so let's say that now you're at the Menendez computer and you want to see the content of this file that you've seen that has the name Will. Mm-hmm. And you do what you just described. Copy blank Will colon.
Right.
Okay? And then you would expect that what would come up on the screen is whatever is in that file, whatever that document called Will is, correct?
Depending on the word processor, yes.
Okay.
Certain word processors embed certain codes so that it doesn't just have the text, it has codes, and those codes may prevent it from being possible to just view on the screen this way. But could get an approximation of the file in this fashion.
Did you try that in order to read that file called will? Did you try to read that file called will?
Yes, I used a different kind of editor, not a DOS editor. I used one that is not sensitive to these other control codes, to the non-printable characters, the non-letter information.
Okay, let me just
So
ask a question about that. Word processing programs have a series of codes that look like complete hieroglyphics
Right.
to the human eye. And every document created in one of these word processing programs has these hidden codes.
Right.
You don't see them on the screen, but they're there.
Right. It tells
And if you try to read them through DOS, I think what you're saying is sometimes you'll get on the screen those hieroglyphic codes
Right.
instead of the alphabet typed out information.
Right.
So you went in using something like Xtree?
I used Xtree was to see what files existed. I probably used, I don't recall exactly, I probably used IBM's professional editor to look at the file. And that's,
Okay.
that's the one I generally carry for that type of task. I don't recall exactly which one I used, but I would guess that would be the tool I would use.
So you used one of these programs and you wanted to see what was in this file will, and did you see what was in that file will?
Yes, I did.
And what was in that file will?
What was in that file will was a directory listing of one of the subdirectories.
So it wasn't
wasn't
actually a document.
No, per se.
Or if it was a document, it was a document that just had a list of file names.
Of 4 file names or 5 file names.
And did you do the same thing with the other headings of this? You said that you had seen several files.
Whichever files were there that were on the list, I did the same thing.
And if for each and every one that you did that to, did it wind up that you got an identical screen? In other words, each of those files had the identical information in them, which
To the
was
best of my recollection, they were each identical.
and they were a directory.
And they were a directory.
And do you recall now that when you looked at that, when you did this, I'll strike that. Do you recall now that when you first saw the directory on the screen that had these file names, that the files, or at least some of them, appear to have been last worked on or last changed within a minute or so of each other?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, this was an IBM XT computer,
Yes, ma'am.
and at that time, it was an old one when you saw it.
Definitely.
And at that time, when you would turn on one of those IBM XT computers, if you wanted it to keep track of the date, you'd have to actually tell it what the date was on that day that you turned the machine on.
Right. The way an XT was designed, whenever you turned it on, it would think it was 1980. And then you would have to explicitly tell it the date. It is possible to put a special card in it that would make it have an ongoing clock. I don't know for sure whether or not one of those was in the machine. Don't recall that.
So it could have had
So
a special card that would have acted like a continuous clock the way
Right.
more modern computers act
Right.
now. So all you'd have to turn it on and it would know
And
the
it would
date.
know whatever, relative to whatever date it thought it was yesterday, it would still be progressing. I don't
Assuming there
recall
wasn't power outages and things like that.
battery failures and the like.
Okay, so this could have been a computer that was keeping track of its own time, or it could have been a computer where you'd have to actually type in the date each day when you turned it on.
Right.
Okay. Now, do you recall that these files that you found, and you do remember at least one was called Will and one was called Menendez?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall that they appeared to have the same date and a time of just 1 minute apart?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall, Mr. Witkin, if the other things that you saw on the directory, other entries, also had the same date or a different date?
To tell you the truth, I don't recall.
Pardon me, objection vague as to what other things on the directory.
All right, let's be more specific, please.
Okay. When you searched this computer and came up with, I believe you said it was a subdirectory that contained those specific file names, Will and Menendez?
So,
And what was the name of the subdirectory?
I believe the subdirectory was called Menendez. I don't recall that from the original time. I do recall that from where it was refreshed from an earlier exhibit that I was presented that seems to have been similar to one of those files.
And I'm holding an exhibit that's been previously marked 70. May I approach?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Witkin, our jury is there. So I'll stand here so when you answer my questions, you're still directing your voice towards them. Let me show you Exhibit 70. Now, you have seen that exhibit before in this courtroom a little while ago.
Yes, ma'am.
And in looking at Exhibit 70, does Exhibit 70 appear to be similar to what you saw on the screen of the Menendez computer?
Similar.
You can't say that it's identical to what you saw, is that correct?
Right.
But you also can't say that it's totally different.
Right.
Was there a printer in the bedroom of this home where this computer was?
I don't recall, but I can look at the picture and tell you.
Well,
But I really don't.
see if you can see a printer, but
Yeah, to tell you the truth, I really don't remember. And I don't see one. Yes, I do see one directly on top of the machine.
so there is.
So I
a
would say
printer.
that there is in fact a printer there.
And the paper that Exhibit 70 is made up of, is that standard computer printout paper?
It's standard wide carriage paper. And it is in fact the kind of paper that would more than likely have been used in this printer that I see here. This is a wide carriage printer. So there's a good chance that this is the type of paper that they would have used.
Okay,
Generally for home use, most people don't buy the wide carriage paper.
okay, but would it make sense to you if this was a computer, in fact, that had come from a business and then was taken home?
Definitely possible.
Okay, let's look then at what's on Exhibit 70. And let's start with the first line. It says C. Is that a greater than sign?
Yes.
C : / Menendez.
Right.
Okay, but what is that? Is that an attempt at a command?
It's a totally meaningless attempt at a command.
You have to keep
Sorry.
talking with the microphone.
It's an attempt at a command. It's attempting to execute a program called Menendez.
Okay, and it doesn't work because it's not a proper
It's
command.
not a proper command.
Now, the next line says DOS, does it not?
Yes.
And next to that, it's in parentheses, it says directory.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, what is that?
That is identifying a subdirectory called DOS.
Okay,
So that whatever this listing is a snippet of another directory listing. You can tell from this that it's not a full list. This list said there should be 70 files, yet we see only 6 files.
actually, I think it says 90.
No,
files.
sorry, 90 files, and we see only 6.
Okay, so, but it's showing you DOS directory, and that is a valid thing that would show up on a screen.
Yes.
And that shows a creation or a last worked upon date, does it not?
Yes.
And that date is January 20th, 1986,
Yes.
and it has a time of 12:25 p.m.
Yes.
Okay, now the next thing here is something called X-tree, or the symbol for something called X-tree.
Right.
And is X-tree a type of program?
Xtree is a type of program, but if it were the program Xtree, it should say xtree.exe, not plain Xtree. Plain
Okay.
Xtree, again, is meaningless.
Okay, but nevertheless, it shows a number of characters, or
Right.
it shows that this X-tree, whatever it is, has data in it.
Yes.
In fact, it's got 22,445 bytes of data in it.
Right.
Okay. And this also has a date, and this date is March 25th, 88.
Yes, ma'am.
And it also has a time of 9:41 a.m.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, does that indicate that, let's assume hypothetically you load a program into a computer, and it's a computer that has an automatic clock.
Right.
Will that, when you then look at the directory on that computer, and it lists that program as one of the things in it, will it always show the date that that program was loaded?
No, it will not.
So what date will it show? The last time you worked that program?
No, if it's a program like Xtree, where it's a purchase program, it will show the last date that the publisher worked on the program before they shipped it. But again, those dates aren't always real. If you look at the current copy of Microsoft Windows, which is a program that didn't exist until 1993, there are several files in it that are dated 87 and 88. So it's, or just, I mean, those date stamps and time stamps, as often as not, are meaningless and irrelevant.
In those programs?
In many store-bought programs.
Okay, let's get back to this, though. You think that this X-tree is not really a program, but what, a document?
No, it looks like a corrupted file. I mean, the Xtree is a program. but Xtree should be Xtree EXE or Xtree COM.
So
But
this
it's-
looks like it might be a file with the name Xtree.
Right.
And it's a file with,
Some size, 22,000 bytes, but it's not,
it's about 11 pages of material.
depends on what it is. If it's a text file, yeah, about 2,000 bytes per page, give or take.
Okay, the next line is the word, it appears to be guest, Guest.
It's also the name of a directory.
And that's a directory. And that shows a date of March 25th, 88, and a time of 9:43 a.m. Does that mean that's when that directory was created on this computer?
Most likely. I mean, looking at also the one that's almost more indicative is a DOS directory is generally one of the first things that you create when you set up a new machine. So if theoretically this were a piece of the directory from the main directory, and it had not been changed or modified or corrupted, it would imply that, and if they had set the date correctly when they first set the machine up, it would imply that this machine was first set up in 1988. Because you see both of these directories being created same date, roughly the same time.
Okay, but then we're about to hit a row of 3 things that all have dates of 1987 on them.
As I said, most of the dates are irrelevant. I mean, with an XT, it's very hard to get anything from the dates.
Okay, but let's go on with this. Because what we do have now is entries that have different dates, not all, and none of them are 1980, is that correct?
None of these are 1980.
All right, now let's go to the next entry. Under guest, which is a directory, we now have 3 files, Will, Menendez, and List. Is that
Right.
correct? Now, are they files under the guest directory?
No, they are not.
All right, so they're just separate files.
They are separate files in the main directory, or this snippet of the main directory.
Now, according to this printout, the Will file has 59 bytes or 59 characters.
Right,
The Menendez file has 59 bytes or characters.
right.
And the List file has 59 bytes or characters.
Yes, ma'am.
And all 3 of these files have the same date, January 13th, 1987.
Yes,
And all 3 of them appear to have been last worked upon or created, whichever it is, a minute apart. One at 4:58 a.m., one at 4:59 a.m., and one at 5 a.m.
right.
So does that appear to comport somewhat, at least with your memory, that you found individual files that had no significant information, but the identical information?
It's the way I recall it, yes.
And that's what that looks like, 3 files with identical information created at or near the same time.
Yes.
Now, 59 bytes, if you translate that, let's assume it's text. If you translate that into words, how many words would 59 bytes be?
7, 8. I mean, if you figure, an average of 8 characters per word, 10 words.
Okay. I have nothing further.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Members, please.
Yes.
Mr. Witkin, you have in front of you an exhibit which is marked as Exhibit 70. Is there any way to tell from looking at this exhibit the date and time that it was actually prepared?
No, there's no way to tell.
Now, I believe you indicated that certain kinds of computers have built-in clocks and other types of computers, the older models, you have to tell the computer what time it is. Is that
Right.
correct?
And even those with built-in clocks, you can override the time with one command. You type date and tell it the date, and as far as it's concerned, it will be that date.
So I could go home and tell my computer tonight that it's 1972.
Right. And in fact, for accounting systems, you'll find people often do that. They will reset their accounting system to a prior quarter or to a prior month so that they can fool the computer into thinking it's one date so they can go back and enter things in the past and then reset it to a current date. So it's a very, very simple thing to do.
So if I wanted to, I could go home. Well, let me ask you this. Could I go home tonight if I had one of these printers that took this kind of paper and actually create this document?
Absolutely.
How long do you think it would take me? Well, not knowing as much as you do, but how long would it take to create something like that?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to how long it would take counsel, since how long it would take counsel is irrelevant.
Okay, how long would it take you, Mr. Witkin?
10 minutes, 5 minutes.
So you could recreate everything on this by telling the computer different times and dates and then inputting that into the computer and then printing it out.
Right.
Now, according to this document 70, there appears to be these 3
files and they have 59 bytes. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, is it correct also that when you work on a file, if you change the file, it will put a new time and date stamp on the file?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to go stand over here so you look at the jury.
Sorry.
And you indicated 59 bytes was anywhere from 8 to 10 words. If the file previously had contained, let's say, 20,000 bytes, and you went back and changed it to very few words, would there be any indication that the file previously had 20,000 bytes?
None at all.
Could you tell the jury briefly what bytes are?
Characters or letters. I mean, if I took a 20,000 word document and I just copied a directory over it, it would replace that document with the directory, and there would be no record that it had ever contained anything other than that directory. You'd write right over the top of it. It would have a new time stamp, a new date. It would have a new file size, and the information that had previously been held in that file, each individual letter, the letters would be written over and gone.
So I could go to my computer tonight and take 3 files, tell the computer that it's 1987, and write over each of those 3 files the identical 59 bytes.
Right.
Is that
And in
correct?
fact, if you wanted to erase the file and erase it in a way that's non-recoverable, the best way to do so isn't to tell it to delete the file, but to write something else over the top of it.
Would you need to write over all 20,000 characters, or could you just write a few characters?
If you didn't write over all 20,000, the characters could still exist on the disk. They wouldn't be associated with any file. They would just be sitting on the disk. But the next file, the way DOS allocates new memories, the next time you created a file, it would go right over the top of whatever space you had just freed up. Generally, as you free up space, that will be the next space used. So if I had a 20,000 byte file, copied a 59 byte file over it, it would erase the first 512, don't ask me why, but it would create the first block and leave the rest of the data there. But every other file that you wrote would go right over the top of whatever other data was sitting out on the disk.
And thereby erase it.
And thereby erase it. So it's one of the best ways to eliminate the information.
Now, you use the term corrupted file. Could you tell us what that means?
A corrupted file, a computer isn't perfect. The way it stores information is it takes, there's a metal platter, a hard disk is a metal platter coated with kind of a rubberized magnetic film. And the way it stores information is it just magnetizes it. It magnetizes the file film one direction or the other. So you can get something called a hard disk crash. You can destroy data or damage a computer. If you drop the computer, you bang into the computer. There's numerous things that will force it to scratch the electronic media. You can put a magnet next to it. There's numerous things that will allow it to change the information kind of in an inconsistent fashion, and you'll end up with a file that no longer is a meaningful file. It may still have the name, it may still be on the directory, but the information that it used to contain is no longer of any validity.
And that's what you mean by corrupted.
And that's what I mean by corrupted.
Lastly, the exhibit in front of you, number 70, did you create that exhibit?
No, I did not.
Do you have any knowledge personal as to where it came from?
I've actually I saw it here today, and I've seen a previous copy that was sent to me by a private investigator working for one of the defense counsels.
But as far as your personal knowledge of where that came from, you have no idea. Is that correct?
No, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any further cross?
Yes, Mr. Witkin, your understanding of computers is on the high end of sophisticated, is it not?
I hope so.
In looking at Exhibit 70 and that the first entry on it, you said that was a totally meaningless set of commands, correct?
On 70, the first command is C:\Menendez. So theoretically, they could have named a program Menendez, but it's...
You said that was an ineffectual command.
Right. Assuming that's an ineffect, right? Typing it is basically meaningless. Unless they've created a program called Menendez, it's meaningless. But seeing what it's producing immediately thereafter, it's pretty much meaningless.
Okay, but my point is it does not look like a person with your level of computer sophistication
created
typed
this
that first,
document.
created that document,
No,
correct?
ma'am. Exactly. I mean, just looking also, if you look at the continuation, where there are another half a dozen attempts at issuing it as a command.
When you say the continuation, there's more written on that sheet
There's more written on
than
this
what-
page than the directory.
You've got to wait for the question.
Yes,
sorry.
let him finish the answer before you ask your next question. Did you finish your answer?
Yes, sir.
My question was, there's more material on that printout than those files that I took you through a little while ago.
Yes, ma'am, there is.
All right, and below those files, there seems to be a series of attempts by someone who is not as sophisticated as you to call up some files from the computer,
Yes, ma'am.
correct? And they're not doing it right.
No, ma'am, they're not.
So that does not exhibit, does it, to you, a high level of understanding of how this computer works?
No, ma'am. There is one just in the
All right,
way.
you've answered the question.
Sorry.
Now, you say that there's this method to write over and on top of a file. Does that come in the DOS book that you get for a computer? Does it tell you how to do that?
I'm not sure.
Is that something that your word processing program book will tell you?
Your word processing book will definitely tell you, because it'll tell you how to avoid doing so that you don't damage your documents.
So this is something that people stumbling around can sometimes do and damage their documents, or something someone very sophisticated can do to hide a file. Is that
Definitely
correct?
possible, yes.
Now, let's take someone very sophisticated like yourself. If someone had made an effort to write over a 20,000 byte file with a 59 byte file, what you're saying is you wouldn't be able to find that previous 20,000 bytes as a file, but they're still on that disk, aren't they?
Possibly.
And there are utility programs and tools that you could use to try to find that data.
Which is what I did.
And
Yes.
you didn't find it, did you?
No, ma'am, I did not.
Nothing further.
I have one question.
Yes.
Mr. Witkin, on Exhibit 70, there are the three files that you made reference to are 1 minute apart.
Yes, ma'am.
What does that signify to you, please?
A conscious effort to write over that it was not a corrupted file that produced those small files. That whatever data those files had contained, they do not contain this data through corruption. That it was a conscious effort to copy whatever information is in them into them.
When you say a conscious effort to copy whatever information is in them to them, what did you mean?
Good question.
What did that mean?
You can look at a file that's damaged for whatever reason, and try to decide whether that file, whether the file is damaged through just the disk itself failing, through a fluke of something, one of the things just happened on the computer, or whether it took active intervention, whether it was purposeful intervention or accidental intervention. You couldn't create these files in this format without a person consciously intervening to create those files. Whether he knew that's what he was doing or not, I can't say, but it takes a conscious effort to create these three files, same size, same data, one right after the other.
And you indicated that there was a date for all of these and they were 1 minute apart, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And I'm referring now to when you looked at the computer screen, not the exhibit before you.
That I don't recall. I'm sorry.
All right. Do you recall what the time frame was regarding those 4 files? You had indicated.
I remember when I saw them, I remember it striking me that they were basically identical times, but whether they were all 1 minute apart or 2 minutes apart, I remember it struck me at that time that they were done sequentially, but I don't remember now the exact time sequence.
Was there any indication as to the date they were done?
I don't remember what that date would have been. I don't recall.
Was there some reason why you didn't pay attention to the date that these events occurred, or as they were reflected on the screen anyway?
Because as I said, as a general rule on an XT, date stamps are meaningless. Only because it doesn't hold the date, because every time you turn it on, you have to type in a date. they're generally random. They're generally not meaningful on an XT. So
Alright.
for the most part, you just ignore them.
Is that what you did?
Just ignore them.
All right, anything else?
Just to clarify the court's question, if I can ask from here, Your Honor. I just want to see if I understand your answer to the judge's question. When you say conscious, it means a person had to hit some keys on the computer. Whether they knew what they were doing or didn't know what they were doing, they had to hit the keys on the computer to create files that look like this.
Right.
As compared to lightning strikes the building and your computer blows out and that destroys it.
Exactly.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
All right, anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. You may step down, you're excused.
Thank you, sir.
All right, and we will now resume testimony. Are you ready with the next witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, and it'll just take a moment, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get organized and have everybody present, including the other jury. So as soon as all counsel can get organized here, we'll resume with both juries and the next witness. Yes. It'll be just a brief moment here when we get the other jury in and both defendants and counsel organized. All right, we have both juries back in the courtroom and we're ready to resume with the next witness. As far as the Lyle Menendez jury, I know it took a little longer, but unfortunately we had a situation where we got a little late start after our recess when we excused you. And it took us a little longer to finish off what we had to do, but we're now ready to resume. And the next witness has been here once before already, and we wanted to make sure that we could get to her before we took a break. So this witness will now be testifying in the trial, and people may call that witness.
Your Honor, people call Mary Ellen Mahar.
My name is Mary Ellen Mahar,
Spell your last name, please.
Mahar.
All right, Mr. Kuriyama.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Mahar, how are you employed?
Presently,
Yes.
in the jewelry industry.
Directing your attention to August 24th, 1989, how were you employed?
I was employed by Slavik's Jewelry Store.
And were you working that day?
Yes, I was.
Which store were you working at?
The Century City Store?
Is that located at 10250 Santa Monica Boulevard?
Yes, it is.
At approximately 10:30 in the morning, were you waiting on customers?
Yes.
We have the date again, please.
Yes, that's the 24th of August, 1989, approximately 10:30 in the morning.
Approximately.
Do you see anyone in the courtroom that you're waiting on that day?
Yes.
Would you identify those persons?
The two gentlemen, one in blue and white shirt and the other in a green sweater.
The witness is referring to the two defendants at counsel table.
Would you describe for the jurors the transaction that took place that day between yourself and these two defendants?
They wanted to look at Rolex watches, and we did so. They selected some watches.
Your Honor, I'm getting you to pose an objection to the use of they.
Objection overruled, but if you can specify who did what, it would help. Mr.
Okay.
Kuriyama.
Ms. Mahar, do you recall which one of the defendants did that in particular?
Not specifically, no. They were together.
Okay. They were together, and were you showing them Rolex watches?
Yes, I was.
Do you recall which kinds of Rolex watches you showed these defendants?
Specifically, yes, I do.
What did you show them?
I showed them a lot. Do you want to know specifically what was purchased or what was shown?
Did you actually sell Rolex watches that day to these defendants?
Yes, I did. I sold them 3.
Okay, and would you describe for the jurors what types of Rolex watches you sold to them?
One Rolex watch that I sold to them was a gentleman's model, 18 karat yellow gold, referred to as a presidential model. A second watch that was purchased was a stainless steel Rolex known as a Submariner model. And the third one was a stainless steel model referred to as a Datejust model. Datejust.
Does that particular watch have a diamond dial?
Can I remember today, did it have a diamond dial? Not specifically, no.
Did you sell these defendants anything else at the jewelry store?
Yes, I did.
What was that?
Money clips.
Here I have a poster I'd like to have marked as Exhibit 71. Appears to be three separate receipts.
All right, Exhibit 71.
And councils, we stipulate that for American Express account number 3728-082918-12002, that the card holder, card member for that particular account was Jose Menendez, counsel for Eric Menendez,
So stipulated.
and counsel for Joseph Lyle Menendez. Thank you. Any question?
Yes.
Mahar, directing your attention to Exhibit 71. Could you explain some of the information on these three receipts? That is, you were working at Slavics that day, is that correct?
Yes, and the location is indicated by the store number immediately after the word Slavics.
And would that be the number 2183?
Yes, it is.
That
That would designate that it was the Century City location on Santa Monica Boulevard.
Did the defendants present to you an American Express credit card to make these purchases that you described?
Yes, they did.
And was the name on that credit card J.E. Menendez?
There were initials. I believe the first initial was J, the second initial I don't recall, and the name Menendez.
What procedure did you have to follow with respect to getting authorization for the defendants to use that particular card that was presented to you?
They had to follow a somewhat different procedure than normal in that the clients were not known and there were initials only on the credit card. So instead of using normal procedures, I called American Express and asked to speak to a supervisor for supervisory approval on this sale because there were only initials, not first names, and the individuals were not known to me. I had not seen either one of them before the date that they purchased the watches.
Did you get such approval?
Yes, I did.
Were you given instructions by the authorities regarding the actual sale and what you had to get by way of identification from the defendants?
Objection, call speaker.
Objection sustained. You might as well go on to what actually she did.
Okay. What did you do after you got the authorization for the credit card sale?
What did I do? I would have established with American Express that whichever one of the gentlemen signed the American Express was in fact authorized to use the card. I would have been given an approval number and I would have obtained identification to make sure that someone else was not using this card.
What sort of identification would you be looking to in that regard?
A photo identification, generally about the only thing that is acceptable really is a California driver's license or any driver's license from the cardholder's home state, wherever that happens to be.
And did you get such identification from the person that signed for the purchase?
I believe I did. To the best of my recollection, I would have, yes.
That would have been required?
Yes.
Do you recall whether or not the defendants had any bags with them on that day?
Specifically, yes, they had bags. I mean, it's a large shopping center. They were carrying bags.
Now, with respect to Exhibit 71, there are certain amounts listed on those receipts. Can you see those amounts?
Yes, I can.
Do you have a recollection of how much the purchase price
was on that date for the watches and the money clips?
The one for the largest amount, $9,968.40, most likely is for the solid 18 karat gold model, the presidential model. The second largest amount of $4,762 is probably the two stainless steel Rolexes. The $309 specifically is probably money clips. Beyond that, I cannot tell you exactly at this time.
On August 24th, when you made the sale to the defendants, had you heard of the killings of the Mr. and Mrs. Menendez prior to that?
Yes, I had read about it in the newspaper.
When you were presented the American Express card with Menendez on the card, did you know that the defendants were the sons of the people that had been killed?
Specifically, by the time the card was presented, I can't tell you that whether or not now I knew that at that time. Am I making myself clear?
Maybe you can clarify a little bit more.
Okay, when the card was presented to me, did I know at that point that they had just recently lost their parents? Right now, today, I can't tell you specifically. I mean, the name had significance.
Was that an unusual sale for you?
Extremely unusual for a couple of reasons.
What are those reasons?
One was their age, and the other was the size, the dollar figure of the sale.
With this particular sale, did you have to take extraordinary steps to get the watches to the defendants?
Just for one watch, the solid gold presidential model. The store that I was in was out of stock, and I had to drive to Torrance to the Bailey Banks and Biddle store in Del Amo. Pardon me? Bailey Banks and Biddle. And pick up that watch from our sister store and drive back to Century City so that it could be delivered.
Do you recall a conversation which took place between one of the brothers and another person over the phone in your presence?
Yes, I do.
And would you describe for the jurors how that conversation took place?
The conversation took place because they needed to make wanted to make a telephone call. And as a matter of courtesy, telephones were always within easy reach for a customer to use. And I put the telephone on the counter to be used, so it was very close to me, within 3 or 4 feet, whatever the exact width of the counter is, I don't know today. And they made a telephone call.
Objection, Your Honor, to the use of name.
One of the two gentlemen made a telephone call.
All right, with that modification, objection is overruled.
Do you recall the nature of that conversation?
The nature of the conversation, I heard one side of the conversation pretty clearly.
And with respect to that one side of the conversation, was it by one of the defendants?
Yes, it was.
What did you hear?
I heard the person that was being spoken to, the name was Carlos. The upcoming memorial service that was to take place in New Jersey was mentioned, and that the purchase of the watches was discussed, and whichever one of the defendants made the telephone call told Carlos that they didn't think it would be appropriate to wear the solid gold Rolex Presidential to the memorial service.
Did he request any money at that time from the person that he was talking to?
Did he request any? Did he request any money?
Do you recall giving a report to the Beverly Hills detectives on or about?
All right, do you have that recollection, yes or no?
Do I have,
about a conversation regarding money?
specifically right now, can I recall one? No.
Okay, your next question.
Do you recall making a statement to the Beverly Hills detectives in this case on or about September 11th, 1989?
That I did, in fact, hear? Yes, I do.
Do you think it would refresh your present recollection to take a look at that report?
It may. I mean, it's been a long time. If I made a statement to that effect in 1989, it must have happened. Asking me in 1993, I can't recall a specific dollar figure. I hope that I make myself clear.
Yes. All right, the objection sustained. The entire last answer is stricken. You may approach the witness.
Yes, I made that statement. It's in quotes.
Would you relate to the jury what that statement was?
I'm going to object at this time. I don't think it's clear whether this refreshes a recollection or she just knows saying she may have made.
All right, the objection is sustained. If you can pursue that, Mr. Kuriyama.
Ms. Mahar, does this report refresh your present recollection as to what you told the detectives and as to what happened on the 24th of August? I know it's been a long time, but reviewing this report, does that refresh your present recollection?
Everything in this paragraph, I remember very clearly, except the statement about the cash advance. If it's in my statement, it must have happened. I don't.
I'm going to object and move to strike. The question is whether it refreshes a recollection.
All right, objection sustained. Objection sustained after the answer no.
I have nothing further at this time.
All right, cross-examination.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Mahar, you indicate you recall the incident of these two young men coming into the jewelry store. Is
Yes,
that
I
correct?
do.
And you remember that you had to check whether they were authorized to use the American Express card.
Yes, I
Is that
do.
correct?
Yes.
So is there a process by which people other than those named on the card actually have permission to use the card?
Yes, there is.
And you would not have sold these items to them if it wasn't for the fact they were authorized to use this card. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, you've indicated that it's usually your practice to ask for some identification.
Yes.
Okay, do you have an independent memory of asking for it at this time, or you just think that that's what you usually do, so you probably did it then?
I probably did it then, and also it's, how can I best describe it? In a sale of that amount, if you don't follow the proper procedures and someone who's not been authorized to use that card, then a credit card company can charge it back to the store. And that is part of one's responsibility, is to uphold the proper procedures to make sure that items, whether it's $2,000 or $20,000, do not in effect get charged back to the store as a loss.
Okay, so you would want some picture identification, is that correct?
Yes, I would. So in the event that there were fraudulent use of a card, I would still have a job
Okay.
after that fraud had been discovered.
I think you indicated that a driver's license, either California or the person's home state, if they were from out of state, would be acceptable.
Yes,
Is that
it would.
correct?
Yes.
And would any other photo identification, such as a university identification that had a photograph on it, or?
It would be pretty irregular to accept that.
Okay, but an out-of-state driver's license would be
Certainly,
acceptable.
certainly, yes.
And when you looked at the receipts that Mr. Kuriyama showed you today, and you looked at each one and said it was probably for this watch, it was probably for that item, I take it you don't have a specific memory as to those receipts in terms of what exactly was bought with those receipts based on the amount. Is that correct?
Is that correct? To the best of my recollection, knowing what those watches cost and prices change and so forth, that is probably very accurate. The there is somewhere exist an itemized breakdown that's going to be in my handwriting that would eventually prove that out.
Okay, but you don't have that here.
No, I do not have
Okay,
that here,
so,
no.
but looking at the receipts, you're just making your best guesses based on what you know things to cost.
Yes,
This phone conversation that you told us about, I believe the phone is on the counter in the jewelry store, is that correct?
placed there when a client needs to use it, yes.
Okay. Was there any effort to make this phone call in a private setting? Or was it made right in front of you, so?
It was made right in front of me.
Okay. So there was nothing secretive about the phone call?
No.
Okay.
No.
And the person talking on the phone was talking openly about buying watches and where was appropriate
Yes,
to
they
wear
were.
them?
Yes, they were. He was, excuse me.
And seeking some advice about it, I believe you said?
That's how I took it to be, perhaps just asking an opinion.
Okay. Do you remember what the demeanor was like of these two young men on that day? I mean, was this a party? Was this fun? Was there a lot of joking going on, or was their demeanor otherwise?
The demeanor was not, it was not a party, no. I would have to say somewhat subdued.
Okay. And in the past, have you used words such as showing stress, subdued, and serious to describe their behavior?
Have I before? I've made statements, I've testified before grand jury. Perhaps those are words I have chosen.
Okay. Are those words that seem appropriate based on what you observed?
Do they seem subdued? How can one determine when you've never seen two people before whether or not they're stressed? I mean, it's rather difficult to determine.
So if a police officer in September of 1989 wrote down that you said they appeared to be under stress, do you think that that might have been something you said at that time?
It's possible. It's hard for me to remember exactly what I said almost 4 years ago, but it's possible, yes.
Okay.
Your Honor, if I may. Counsel, where are you?
And you indicated that you testified before the grand jury, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And at that time, if I indicated that you had testified that they were subdued, I believe you said that that would be a correct description of their behavior?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination by the defendant, Eric Menendez. Right.
Good afternoon, Ms. Mahar.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Mahar, this Slavix was located in the Century City Shopping Mall.
Yes,
correct?
it was.
Okay, and was it in fact near the Bullock's department store?
Quite close, yes.
And on August 24th, 1989, these two customers just wandered into the store in the morning, correct?
Objection calls for speculation and wandered in.
Sustained.
Had
It's-
anybody, had,
You have to make a conscious
So
choice.
wait, hold on a
Okay.
second. There's no question. You have to wait for another question.
Excuse me.
okay. You had no prior notice that they were coming in, you just saw them in the store, correct?
Yes.
In fact, some customers in your store will call first and arrange to come in. But
Yes.
These were just walk-ins.
Yes.
And in fact, when the two walked in the store, did it appear that at least one of them had been shopping at Bullock's?
Yes.
Do you recall seeing the Bullock's shopping bags?
There were bags. Bullock's does seem to ring a bell, yes.
Now, Mr. Kuriyama asked you about a statement that you made to the Beverly Hills Police Department on September 11th, 1989. Do you recall being interviewed by the police on that date?
On that date specifically, I was interviewed. It could have been 2 weeks. It could have been 3 or 4 weeks later. I did make a statement to the Beverly Hills Police Department, yes.
And that statement was made shortly after August 24th when these two young men came into your store.
Yes.
And in making the statement to the police, did you try and give them correct and accurate information?
Yes, I did.
And at the time you made the statement to the police, it was within days of having had these two men in the store and selling these various items. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Days, I'm still recalling 2 to 3 weeks after the sale. Specifically, I can't tell you the date of the exact first interview.
And isn't it correct that your memory of what occurred on August 24th was probably better back in September of 1989 than it is today?
Yes.
And in fact, when the men from the Beverly Hills Police Department talked to you, were they taking notes? That is, writing down what you had to say?
In 1993, can I say exactly did they do that? I don't recall. I imagine so. Police always take notes when you make statements.
Okay. Has anyone ever showed you, Ms. Mahar, a report about the interview with you a few weeks or 2 weeks after the sales to help you remember what you said?
I was mailed a copy of my grand jury testimony.
Did anyone ever show you a copy of the police report about the interview back in September of 1989?
There may have been part of that in what was mailed to me prior to this proceeding.
Okay, I take it from your
I
uncertainty.
believe I have seen part of it. I don't know where one ends and another begins. I don't mean to be vague, but I believe that part of that was.
Okay. And have you read that police report?
Yes, I have. It was mailed to me in June of 1993.
Okay. And do you recall talking to the police in September of 1989 and telling them, the police, that one of the two young men was doing most of the talking?
Yes, I recall that because that is part of what was mailed to me before when I was called to appear at this proceeding.
Okay. And is that, in fact, what occurred in August of 1989? That is, that one of the two men was doing the majority of the talking?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And is it also correct that the other one, that is the non-talker,
Mhm.
was relatively quiet?
Yes, I recall that, yes.
Okay. And when you spoke to the police in September of 1989, were you able to tell the police which of the two young men that was in the store took the active talking role in this transaction?
In all honesty, I do not remember.
Okay. Do you think looking at your police, the copy of your police report, would help you remember whether you were able to identify which one took the active talking role?
Yeah, I believe I did at that time. I have not memorized what I said in
The
1989.
question was, would it help you if you looked at the report?
It may.
Okay, thank you. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Mahar, does reading that report help you remember whether you were able to identify one of the two young men as being the one who was doing the talking?
Yes.
Okay, and how did you identify that young man as the one that was doing the talking? Did you call him by name?
Well, at some point during a transaction, you learn people's names. Specifically, how did I learn them? Did I introduce myself? I don't remember.
Okay. In any event, did reading the report help you remember which one was doing most of the talking?
Yes, because I indicate which one does most of the talking in my initial statement from 1989.
Okay. And do you now remember which one was doing the talking based on reading your report?
Yes.
Okay. And which one was doing the talking?
Lyle.
Okay. It was Lyle that appeared to have the dominant role.
Apparently, yes.
Okay.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken. The juries are admonished to disregard it.
Based on what you saw in the store that day,
Mm-hmm.
okay, Lyle was doing the talking, correct?
Yes.
And it was also Lyle who made the phone call, correct?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. I have nothing further at this time.
When you redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Mahar, in that same report, did you indicate that the other person with Lyle selected his own money clip?
Yes.
Now, getting back to your call to the American Express company,
Yes.
and would you describe what kind of authorization you got? That is, the defendants were not on the actual card that was presented to you, correct?
Correct.
What steps did you have to take? What information did you have to give in order for them to be approved with respect to the purchase that they intended to make that day?
The procedure is that the credit card number is given. In this case, I went directly to a supervisor to seek approval because of the initials and last name only being on the card as opposed to a first name, middle initial.
Okay, when you say to a supervisor, was that a supervisor at American Express?
At American Express, that's right, yes.
And
I explained that the individuals were not known to me. I had initials only on the card. The amount of the sale, is this individual who wants to sign for this merchandise authorized to use this credit card? And I was told, yes, they were, and given an approval code.
did you indicate to the person that you were talking to that the defendants had the same last name as the card holder?
Yes, I did.
Did you indicate anything further with respect to your understanding at that point that the parents had been killed?
You're an object, cause for hearsay.
Overruled. You can answer the question.
That wouldn't, to my recollection, that wouldn't be something that would come up. I mean, it's business. You establish identity and whether or not someone's authorized to use a particular credit card and establish that identity, and that's pretty much all there is to it.
Was there information that came to you regarding the limit on that particular card?
Specifically, yes, there was.
What was that limit?
American Express indicated to me that limit was $250,000.
And that this purchase of just over $15,000 was approved by them through your phone conversation with them?
Yes, it was.
Now, Exhibit 71 is not something that you prepared through your employment with Slavic, is that correct?
No, it is not.
Did you generate receipts or paperwork yourself relative to your employment with Slavic?
Yes,
Jewelers?
yes.
What sort of paperwork did you generate?
Receipts that are itemized, that give specific stock number, also the warranty numbers for the Rolexes are on that receipt, as well as signature for the actual purchase, name and address.
The signature would be of the purchaser would sign
Yes,
on
yes,
your receipt?
Yes,
Now, you had indicated that you would get some kind of photo identification.
yes, and that number from a driver's license would have been written on the receipt that I hand wrote.
Okay. Thank you. I have nothing further at this time.
Anything else? All right, thank you. You may step down. You're excused. Now, let me see counsel at the sidebar. All right, counsel have a few matters for the court to consider before we resume with the next witness. And the next witness will be testifying before both juries, but there's no sense in starting at this late hour. We'll start tomorrow morning with the witness. And I'll excuse you then. We'll start tomorrow morning. It'll take about a half an hour perhaps for that hearing. So I'll have time in the morning to do that, and we'll ask that both juries return at 9:45 tomorrow morning, at which time we'll resume with the testimony of the next witness. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any opinions about it. And we'll resume tomorrow at 9:45. I know we've been moving back and forth between courtrooms here, and it's a little difficult. Try to accommodate whichever jury was here at a particular moment, but doesn't always work that way as far as which jury will be where. Just to be on the more consistent side here as far as where you are now, just to make it easier so that you can come back tomorrow. The gold jury come back in here, and the blue jury go next door tomorrow, and it'll equalize. Don't worry, you'll all get equal chance to be everywhere. It just, I know that you've been spending a little more time in the audience than in the jury box, but it'll equalize very shortly. So with that understanding, we'll resume tomorrow at 9:45. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any opinions about it. And we'll see everybody back here tomorrow at 9:45. If the people in the audience would wait until the jurors leave. The prosecution had some photographs you wanted to present to the court. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor, I have double sets of photographs of each of the decedents, which I would like to use with the coroner's testimony. And I also have a package of photographs, both from the coroner's office and the Beverly Hills Police Department, of these procedures, which I'd like the court to look at to make a comparison.
And are all of those together in one group or two groups or what?
Well, the photographs I want to use are in one group, and all the other extra photographs I'm not seeking to use are in a separate group. And those are delineated because they're have a rubber band around them with the two manila envelopes. Those are the ones I'm not seeking to use.
All right, just for the purpose of any future review of this record, how did you want to identify those?
I think I'd like to mark them as an exhibit on it.
All right, then let's do that at this point. You can mark the photographs that you are not offering as a group as Exhibit 72, and these relate to crime scene or coroner photos only.
They are not, they are from, Your Honor, Exhibit 72 is a compilation of photographs taken by the Beverly Hills Police Department and the coroner's office at the autopsy. The photographs I'm seeking to admit contain one crime scene photograph because there is in existence no photograph of the wounds sought to be depicted in that photograph. But there were two photographers of the autopsy.
All right, so 72 is a group of photographs that are not being offered in evidence, but offered to show the court the full range of all the photographs that could be offered. And then you have a separate group of photographs which you do propose to offer, and these are photographs that have been culled out of a larger group that included all of those in Exhibit 72. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, and the court will also mark as another exhibit for the record, Exhibit 73, which is a group of photographs that have been presented to the court. These are photographs contained in 10 separate envelopes, and these are photographs of the crime scenes and have been presented to the court earlier in these proceedings by the prosecution to perfect the record in regards to all of the crime scene photographs that have and are available to the prosecution as opposed to those photographs that the prosecution actually sought to have marked as exhibits and to be received in evidence, and as opposed to those that the court actually did permit to be marked as exhibits and to be received in evidence. And that occurred earlier in these proceedings, I believe on July the 21st. All right, and you also have other photographs here which you are going to show me now, and we'll mark those tomorrow, and you just give them to me now, and then as we proceed in the hearing tomorrow outside the presence of the jury, those photographs will be marked, which are the specific ones that you are offering here. And those will be the subject of the overall hearing that will occur tomorrow morning with the medical examiner.
Your Honor, I have a question about the exhibits. It's my recollection that we were going to be admitting them on a daily basis.
All right, we'll discuss that tomorrow.
Okay.
All right. And then we'll proceed with the testimony of the medical examiner outside the presence of the jury tomorrow at 9 o'clock. I'll review these photographs, and counsel and the witness will be here for the purpose of that hearing. And otherwise, we will take a short recess of 5 minutes, at which time at 4:15, We will resume with a hearing, which will be a hearing in the closed courtroom with only the defendants, their counsel, and a witness present. The prosecution and the public will be excluded from that hearing. So we'll take a recess at this point and resume at 4:15 for the closed hearing.
Should I tell Dr. Gill not to be here until Wednesday?
Well, you tell me what your time estimate is to how long you think the trial will, or the testimony of the medical examiner will take.
I think we've always agreed it would probably take a day.
If that is true, then Dr. Oziel could be told that he would start, assume you'd be ready to start with him promptly on Wednesday morning. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, yes. All right, we'll be in recess.
Okay.